fault lines.
Welcome to
I can't hear you, Jamarl.
Welcome and to the only corner you're going to have today. I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. Typically, I'm here with Shane Stranahan, but he is not doing well today, so you are going to have to be with me. So let's go through the headlines. In the news, President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump tested COVID-19 positive. President Trump and First Lady are in quarantine at the White House early Friday after receiving word that they tested positive for the virus. The president confirmed the disturbing test results himself in a Twitter message shortly before 1 a.m. Tonight, Flotus and I tested positive for COVID-19, the president tweeted. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. Mr. Trump is not the first world leader to be infected. Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain and President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil also tested positive. Stock futures fell in early morning trading at the announcement. The coronavirus has infected more than 7.2 million Americans, killing more than 200,000 of them. Mississippi became the first state in the union to lift mask mandate to curb the spread of the virus as the cases fall. House passes a stimulus package of $2.2 trillion, Democratic Party, of course, on Thursday night as the Trump administration struggled to strike a relief deal. The chamber approved the legislation in a 214-207 vote. 18 Democrats voted against the measure as lawmakers' competitive districts grow wary of the ongoing impasse over aid. The bill likely will not go through the Republican-held Senate and become law. Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has opposed the legislation as his caucus resists spending trillions more on federal response to the pandemic. A high-ranking Vatican official said Wednesday that Pope Francis would not meet with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during his visit to Rome, citing the proximity to the U.S. general election in November. While he did not meet Francis, Pope met with Vatican officials on Thursday, including Cardinal Piero Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and Archbishop Richard Gallagher, the Holy Foreign Minister. The Vatican news agency reported 45-minute encounters and discussed their respective stances on China. On Sunday, a territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan reignited and is now threatening to engulf the whole region. Clashes raged between Armenia and Azerbaijan forces on Friday, despite calls for a ceasefire, as French President Emmanuel Macron warned Turkey against the alleged deployment of jihadists to the war zone. Macron said intelligence reports had established that 300 fighters from jihadist groups in Syria had passed through Turkey en route to Azerbaijan, saying that a red line has been crossed and demanding an explanation. Nearly 200 people have been confirmed killed, including more than 30 civilians, and there are fears of the fighting expanding into an all-out multi-front war that could suck in regional powers, Turkey and Russia. As the clashes entered the sixth day on Friday, the defense minister of Karabakh separatist government reported the deaths of 54 more troops. The Western media is not taking that story seriously. And the more I look into that story, the more worries I have about what's taking place there. It is an expansion. And neither powers, be it Armenia or Azerbaijan, seem to be in a mindset of resolution, let's say it that way, despite what world powers are saying, especially listening to the prime ministers of both countries or reading through what they were saying yesterday. China's biggest ever solar power plant goes live. Chinese President Xi Jinping last week committed his country to carbon neutrality by 2060. This week, China took a small but tangible step in achieving this goal as the country's biggest ever solar power station was connected to the grid in northwest province of Guangdong. The solar park has a capacity of 2.2 gigawatts. That makes it the second biggest in the world, narrowly trailing India. Badla Solar Park. Until now, China's biggest solar station was Tangier Desert Solar Park with a capacity of 1.54 gigawatts. For comparison, the United States' biggest solar farm has a capacity of 579 megawatts. Megawatts. That's less. Honda withdraws from Formula One. Honda withdraws from its Formula One at the end of the 2021 season as it shifts to a goal of carbon neutrality, the Japanese car manufacturer said Friday. Honda is the engine supplier for Red Bull and AlphaTauri teams. It has resumed competition in F1 in 2015. Red Bull Racing said it was disappointed, but noted the success of the partnership with Max Verstappen, scoring Honda's first victory since 2006 at the 2019 Austrian Grand Prix, followed by 3 other wins at the 13-podium finish. Team principal Christian Horner said that respects Honda's decision to redeploy their resources. You're all caught up. That's the news. You're listening to Thomas and Stranahan. So, last night, I spent pretty much all night writing up the way I wanted the show to go today. And in doing the monologue, I had pretty much finished the monologue last night when it came down that Donald Trump had COVID-19. Now, Donald Trump, there's a video of Donald Trump on Sean Hannity having the conversation with Sean Hannity when Hope Hicks, his very attractive assistant, who apparently is very close to Donald Trump and goes around with Donald Trump all the time, came down with COVID-19. This was last night. CBS News has learned Hope Hicks tested negative for COVID-19 Wednesday morning. So she boarded AF1, Air Force One. She developed symptoms during the day and received a second test, which came back positive. Isn't that terrifying? Think about that for a second. All of these tests that people are taking in are like, yes, I'm good. And you find basically a false positive with her getting symptoms later that day, which came back, the second test, positive. The White House knew about this Wednesday, but Trump still had a fundraiser Thursday. Gotta get those bucks, Now, what is the practical reality of this? The president of the United States goes on Sean Hannity, talks about the Hope Hicks thing, she's a hard worker and all of this other stuff. But at the end of the day, she's infected. And as she got infected, you got infected. Now, the reports are that Donald Trump was terrified of getting infected, that he would have places scrubbed down, that he was ensure that this was straight and that was straight and people and all this stuff, because he didn't necessarily want to deal with the reality of the public seeing its president sick and laid low with a disease that he, for the longest time, denied was an issue on videotape or an audio tape. Makes the point that he understands that this is a big deal. He understands how infectious this is. He understands it because he's getting information from China. He knows. And yet, he downplays. For months on end, downplays. Thousands dead. Hundreds of thousands dead. And the president of the United States, for whatever reason, could not bring himself to utilize the powers and capabilities of the office to deal with the real material concerns of the public, be it economic or medical. Richest country on the planet. They give $1,200 to Americans. Many people don't get those checks for months. And when they do get those checks, you have to ask yourself, how far does $1,200 actually go? Mnuchin at one point said this should last for 3 months. Now, granted, he was talking about the employment benefits, but let's be very clear about something. The employment benefits have just gone bust. You have millions of people that are potentially going to be thrown out of their homes. You have, 207,000 people infected with the virus or died from it. The expectation being 300,000 by Christmas. How many ever? Hundreds of thousands by New Year's. And going further with that, the number of people that are infected, 7 million. Many of which, if I'm not mistaken, the overwhelming majority, up to the tune of 80, 90%, has symptoms going beyond the fact that they had the illness. I'm making the point that the responsibility, philosophical, legal responsibility to deal with the concerns of the public does indeed rest in the executive branch. Yes, Congress needs to pass laws because they have the purse, but at the end of the day, the tone is set by the president of the United States. And this president downplayed this virus. So now this president is infected. How am I supposed to regard that? Am I going to be a petty Betty? Am I going to be bitter with hundreds of thousands of people that are dying? When I know the president could have pushed these businesses to make masks and make drugs and make these things that the public itself required. When I know that the executive branch should have been less incompetent, when you had hospitals not fighting over supplies, or for that matter, when the federal government would raid supplies of various states, which got to the point where these hospitals started hiding their supplies, or you had states that would guard their supplies with the police. Think about that. That's an incompetence on a breathtaking level, where you basically have states and the federal government going after each other for resources, as opposed to having a consistent plan. Donald Trump had months to deal with this virus. And right now we know, based on the communications that he's had, leaked messages, that he knew that this virus was significant. He knew this virus was going to be severe. And so, yes, is there a bit of schadenfreude here? Yes, I do get pleasure out of this. Call me a horrible person. Say it's not great for you to get pleasure out of those type of things. Say you yourself, sir, can be struck down with it. And you are absolutely right. I could be struck down with it. Nevertheless, a president of the United States that flagrantly disregarded the fact of all of these people dying, flagrantly disregarded all of these people being infected, and flagrantly disregarded the results of this. The 30 million people out of a job, the 30, 40 million people without health care. Keep in mind, 20-something million people didn't have health care when Obamacare was passed, meaning after Obamacare was passed. So now what, you have another 12, 15 million more? These things weren't dealt with. The number of people that don't have a job. There was no jobs program that was put out from the standpoint of the presidency. No imagination even went to those things. Didn't even care. What the president cared about was forcing people back into their jobs, even if those people were susceptible to the illness. He wanted to get the economy back up and running. When the honest reality of it is, if the president just accepted the reality that people would have used masks early on, the economy would have been back up and running. Those kids could have been back to school. But instead, we're sending kids to school in hostile situations from their own health standpoint. We're sending teachers into situations that are hostile from their own standpoint. Betsy DeVos couldn't be bothered with coming up with a concerted plan for education around the country, since the president wants to force people back into school. I'm making the point that this president put people in flagrantly horrific situations regarding health. And now he's infected. I don't hate this. I thought last night, there's a God. There's a God. Now, whatever you want to think of me for saying something like that, the reality of it is, when you come at me about how horrible of a person I am for saying that, you also explain to me why I should care, considering the number of people that Donald Trump are responsible in regards to their deaths, responsible for their illness. And then you get to the racial skew where you get African Americans and Hispanics at this 2 or 3 to 1 rate higher, depending upon where you are in the nation. No, call me whatever you want. At the end of the day, Donald Trump put this nation in a position that has laid it low, has made it a centerpiece of the world, an epicenter for this virus. Do you realize we have 300 million people in this country? China has like 1.3 million. India is behind us, even though they're catching up. But again, another country with 1.3 billion. And we, in this country, 200,000 people dead, and we lead the world in this. This is not exceptional. And it's not exceptional because one man, one president, made the choice to prioritize business, even from the standpoint of looting the treasury while the country was on fire. That president is now infected, and that president will now have to deal with the consequences of the virus like everybody else has had to deal with the consequences of the virus. 42%, if I am not mistaken, at the very least it was last month, of the people that have died from this virus. This number may be changing now because many of the people who are getting infected are younger, but 42% at the time were elderly or people who were working at those facilities. Now, Donald Trump is one of the elderly men, the hamburger eating Donald Trump that is massively unhealthy in his 70s, and now he is infected with COVID-19. And we're going to see these things don't have great mortality rates, and there will be questions about giving power away if Donald Trump actually indeed gets really sick, as many older people like Donald Trump do. This is not a rah-rah, but it is a bit of schadenfreude, and it is a bit of looking around and say, there is a God. And yes, I hope it hurts, and I hope the recovery takes a very long time. And yes, I want him to fully, entirely understand the reality that all of these people in this country have to deal with as a result of his incompetence, his failure, his unempathy as a president of the United States. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan, running it solo, but I will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. We're coming to you live out of our station from Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you are digging what I am putting down today, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like, give us a share. And also, if you want to join in with the conversation, feel free to do so. You can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is. So definitely don't be shy. Definitely feel free to call in. I think my wife is in the chat putting out the phone number to encourage people to call in today because, after all, it's a single solo day. So your engagement, as always, but definitely today, will definitely make this show what it is. Julian Assange extradition trial came to a close yesterday, October 1st. Now, the trial lasted 4 weeks with testimonies from nearly 36 expert witnesses covering and focusing on the extreme assault on Julian Assange's mental health, the overt political nature of the charges, and the torture and maltreatment he will undoubtedly face during the extradition. These are the arguments, basically, that the defense is making on his behalf. You have assaulted his mental health in this process. This is overtly political in the way that you are going about going after him. And yeah, if he is extradited, he will undoubtedly face all sorts of torture by the United States justice system that is known for its cruelty and brutality around the world. From here, the defense will submit their closing arguments to the court by November 16th. Now, the prosecutors would have 2 weeks to respond with their closing arguments. From here, or from there, the defense would get 72 hours with a final reply. Now, Judge Vanessa Barrister would deliver her verdict on January the 4th, 2021. Judge Barrister has denied bail, which basically forces Julian Assange to remain in a harsh, vicious Belmarsh prison for the duration of the time. Now, understand, all of this is in addition to the 7 years he spent in political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy. Regardless of what you want to think, Assange entered that embassy not to skip bail, not to blow off the legal system, but because he was believed that he was a political prisoner and that they were after him for political reasons. And what do you know? What do you know? A charge that they were pushed to keep on him was hiding a warrant from the United States. That basically, when he was captured and dragged out, it was uncovered that he was indeed right, that the U.S. was fishing for him, and that the patsy nations of Europe were willing to give him up. This is, again, in addition to the 7 years he spent in the Ecuadorian embassy. Even here, a Spanish firm named Musi Global was commissioned to spy on Assange for 24/7, observing privileged conversations with his attorneys, his doctors, journalists that were visiting This includes discussing plans to kidnap and or poison Assange. Now, I've covered Assange for the entire time I've been doing my channel. This goes back several years. Regardless of the outcome of the political prosecution, it is already monstrously tragic and experientially profound. A man bearing only the light of truth. This is your world. This is the real reality of your world. Here are the documents. Look at it for yourself. Don't believe me. Here you are. And that man, bearing the truth, is struck down, ridiculed, and in broad light of day, is imprisoned and tortured by the powers that profit from those lies and the institutions of information distribution that ideally would take prodigious qualms with the implications of the prosecution, instead staying utterly disinterested. How bizarre. And more than bizarre, how profound. The New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, not to mention newspapers around the world, ran one bombshell after the next, inspired by WikiLeaks. And it, as an organization, never got it wrong. Using the response of the United States government as a gauge, what does this say about media in the United States and the value of the information they disclose to the audience? After all, media is supposed to be, philosophically anyway, the instrument that arms the public with information to hold the government accountable, in addition to providing an accurate view of reality. Meaning, how do you operate? How does your decision space resolve reality if you don't have information that's given to you to understand reality? And fact of the matter is, it is the media's job to do that. When Assange puts that information out, when Assange puts those leaks out, they attack and they vilify him. They go after him. Why? Because he's putting out information that's true in a world full of lies. And that world full of lies, do something about it by going after him. The reality of it is, the United States government used some contrived cockamamie notion of universal jurisdiction that patsy lapdog nation Britain goes along with, not just to shut him up, a bearer of truth, but to also make an example of brutality for any other institution that wishes to present reality. Now, despite the leaks the mainstream media gets every other day attacking Trump, I'll tell you this: Chuck Todd, Jake Tapper, Rachel Maddow, and pretty much every other mainstream media outlet in this country is safe. Assange, who was putting out that information, was trying to give you a view of the world that brings you reality. Think about it for the moment. When Tulsi Gabbard goes on CNN and she tells Jake Tapper, "We're army terrorists, Jake," and Jake stutters, stammers, backs away. The government says it's not saying that. The New York Times, of course, after Obama's out of office, runs the story on the billion-dollar campaign where we were basically spending money to pay terrorists with the notion of taking down Assad. Now, the catch becomes, why didn't your media tell you that? Why? Isn't that pertinent news? Isn't that important to know whether or not your country is trying to topple another country? Is it important to know whether your country is destroying crops in another country in order to starve that country? Or for that matter, stealing oil, even after admitting that, yes, the previous president got 500,000 people killed because he wanted to topple the government. I'm making the point to you, is that not something that you should know as an American going about your way? And how do you process the world if you are only given information from one very specific American perspective? I'm making the point to you that what Assange is doing here is beyond heroic. And what has happened to him is beyond monstrous. A man puts out the truth. The reality of this is, in the United States, and as a departure for a moment, the United States was okay with Assange at one point. They turned their attention away from Assange when Hillary Clinton lost. Understand what I'm saying? The intelligence services might have had a point of view of Assange. Don't misunderstand me. Not liking the ideas that he's putting this stuff out truthfully and everything else. But in brass tacks, when the media hated him, it was because Trump won. And the association with Assange and Trump, meaning from WikiLeaks, killed it. Meaning, if that didn't happen, you might actually have a situation where the media cares. I mean, after all, this could hit them if they were putting out information, espionage laws in this particular situation. And yet, they don't. Rachel Maddow did a story on it at one point, making the point of, hey, this is espionage. But even in the framing and the way she made that story, she relentlessly attacked Assange in the processing of that story. He got Hillary Clinton a loss. That's their framing. After all, keep in mind, WikiLeaks was supposed to be the conduit between those things, despite the fact that Roger Stone gets prosecuted for not being the conduit. They still use the terminology that WikiLeaks was the conduit. And in the framing of Democrats' minds all across the United States, that's the guy that got Trump in office. So the fact that they're crucifying him for something that is, how on earth can you have universal jurisdiction without the same protections afforded by our laws to those other people? Yes, we can attack you and vilify you. No, you're not protected by our laws. How is media okay with this? Media is okay with this because whether you're CNN, whether you're MSNBC, in fact is, even whether you're Fox News, you may not want to necessarily deal with the pressure, you attack him. The consensus is he was in some way responsible. More importantly, if you were Donald Trump, Obama didn't want to go after Julian Assange. Obama didn't want to go after Julian Assange because he thought there were problems associated with espionage and how that could be applied to our own media. Meaning, at the very least, he understood, don't set the precedent. If the precedent is set, it can be used against other media organizations, not just Assange, because that's typically the way the laws work. If you're going to go after Assange alone, then you can go after others. Obama didn't do it. Trump, who's been hit, attacked, vilified as being got into office illegitimately, got into office by the effect of Russian Facebook and Twitter ads, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton had over $1 billion and had like over millions of dollars in Twitter trolls for herself. But they used that and they went with that. I joked with my mom yesterday. I said, she said, the guy who I used to get food from, used to buy meat from, his name is Mindia. And my mom said, she goes to him and says, hey, I know you're Russian, right? She says, yeah. And because she realizes that, oh, my boss has the exact same name. And I say, because you're getting meat from that guy, they're going to come up with a story on PBS that says Jamarl Thomas his mom was getting meat at a discount from a Russian agency, and that encouraged him to be more in the scheme of Russia so he can join the channel, and they were basically trying to get him to push back against the stuff that goes in the United States. Basically, they were encouraging him for propaganda by getting him low-cost chickens from Russia. She said, you are insane. And I said, watch. I said, the American public believed that Facebook and Twitter ads was able to topple a $1.6 billion campaign or $3 billion campaign. The majority of those ads took place after the election. None of that mattered. The fact that the company was just trying to make profit like any other company. Meaning, what's more likely to be true? Is it a company that puts out Facebook and Twitter ads for clickbait because it wants people to click on those ads? And when the election comes around, it's what you talk about in the same way we're talking about the election now. It could have actually been a private entity that was going for the notion of just trying to get clicks. And the election itself was a perfect opportunity to use this material to get clicks. That was off the table, despite the fact that it was infinitely rational. Infinitely rational. And instead, Russia, Trump and Russia. And despite the fact that agency was in effect before the election, despite the fact that these ads took place after the election, it didn't matter. Propaganda is. And you'd be all sorts of shocked at the way that people can accept those things if they need to frame their view of reality and if it's continuously over and over and over and over and over, like a drumbeat played. Julian Assange was the guy that tried to break through that noise. He was the guy that tried to give you, this is the light of truth. And the world accepted that, acknowledged that, utilized that information to process the way they went about their way. But at the end of the day, when Trump lost, you had a large segment of this population that basically were angry, bitter, and vindictive at anything that had anything to do with him getting in office. And that's where we are. So you have a large part of the country that basically, out of political reasons, misinformation, and basically a conspiracy theory, allows him to die on the vine, not caring. Angry and bitter and vindictive. Whatever happens to him, happens to him. You have another segment of the population, like myself, and a lot of other people that are in the UK that are angry that this is happening to him and find this to be outrageous. I agree with him. And the Julian Assange case, definitely pay attention to it. Definitely. It feels like anything that you do is insignificant in this process. And that's the aggravation with this. We cover this case. We don't cover this case every day, but we do cover this case. And it is something that all of us watch, all of us are concerned about. I'm going to end this here. We're going to come back with Alexander McCurris. We're going to talk a little bit more about Assange and get into issues of the UK. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. My co-host, Shane Stranahan, who he usually hangs here, does not necessarily feel well, so let's give him all a hopefully that he gets well soon. Joining us, though, as I mentioned before, we're talking about Julian Assange and the pravity of what's taking place in regards to him. We have Alexander McCurris with us, editor-in-chief at the Duran. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be with you again today.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk, starting off with Assange. Basically, the trial ended yesterday on October 1st. And like I said, they're going to have to put in the defense arguments. The prosecution is going to get his say, and then the judge is basically going to give her say, I think January 4th, if I'm not mistaken. After the prosecution gives theirs, there's going to be a reply by the defense for 72 hours. Can you give us a heads up on this trial? Like, you've been there, you're in the UK. Has there been any news, or how has the news in the UK treated this particular trial or regarded this trial? Has this been pursuing its way along?
The news media in the UK has largely ignored this trial. There's been a flurry of interest in the last few days, related principally to the evidence from UC Global. This is this security company that was spying on Assange in the embassy, being paid to do it by Sheldon Adelson, and reporting its findings to the US government. That has attracted interest, and there's been some interest also about the fact that there were apparently even talks of murdering Assange. So that's obviously a news or at a certain level, but even that has got into the sort of back pages. The media has largely ignored the hearing, but the public, the British public, which has its own sources of information, has very, very gradually started to take a greater interest. And there was a substantial crowd outside the court. Interestingly enough, there were a lot more young people than usual. I mean, up to now, the student community and young adults have not really been very interested in the case, but they seem to be coming out more now. And the other thing that was really very, very remarkable is that lots of cars drive past the Central Criminal Court where this hearing is being held. And, of course, they do so regularly on everyday business. And they were busy honking out their horns in support of Assange. And this has apparently been happening now for several days as the hearing has come to an end. So there is a shift in public opinion, and it's becoming both more engaged in the case and more sympathetic to Assange as information about the trial has begun to dribble out. Now, you're quite right in saying that it ended yesterday. Much of the evidence is going to be read only by the judge in writing. You can find witness statements which are posted on the internet. The judge has given a very elaborate timetable of defense submissions, prosecution responses, defense responses, and then the final judgment will be on the 4th of January. All of this is to take place in writing. But I think most of the people who have followed the trial closely, and I should say I was actually physically present on the last day, have come to the clear view that the defense, in other words, Assange's lawyers, have won comprehensively the actual battles on the evidence and on the law. And one of the things that seems to have been worked very strongly in their favor is that the US government has provided 3 different indictments at different times. And they don't seem to have clarified precisely what the case against Assange any longer is. And the judge, and I was there, I heard her say this, is clearly irritated by that. And she's given a direction that the US government must clarify the precise nature of the charges that Assange is facing by Monday. Now, just think about that for a moment. We've just had a whole 4-week trial.
Wait. The United States government went through Herculean effort to basically come up with a cockamamie idea or scheme to get Assange shipped back to the US for prosecution for something. Meaning universal jurisdiction, but not a First Amendment affirmative defense for it. That's bizarre. We can go after you, but you can't use our defenses for it. And on top of that, the judge, after all of this, after all of these years, 7 years, with a sneaky amendment behind the British, the thing of getting him into courts, all of those years, and right now, at the end of this trial, are you telling me that the United States, the judge is basically saying, you need to come up with why you're trying to get him? That's profound.
That's exactly right. We've just had a 4-week trial. We still don't know what the charges are. I mean, we're expecting. I've never known anything like this to happen before. I mean, it really is the world turned upside down. I mean, it's Alice in.
Wait, Alexander, I thought that the charges had to do with espionage. Like, there were like 17 charges that the U.S. kind of came up with.
Yeah. So, firstly, we had 3 indictments. The first indictment didn't say anything about espionage. It was all about interfering with a computer, helping a Manning interfere with a computer. Then they brought in the second indictment, which was all about espionage. The reason they did that, by the way, was because the British made it very clear that they wouldn't extradite on the first indictment because it was too minor an offence and it wasn't even clear that there was an offence there. So then they brought in the Espionage Act indictment, which with the 17 charges. The problem is that is a very political charge, and Britain supposedly doesn't extradite people on political charges. And so just before the trial, they brought a third indictment in which they said, well, you know, we still maintain he should be extradited on the Espionage Act, but he's also been involved with computer hacking, and he's done some bad things in Iceland, not in the US note, and we've got evidence from a key witness of that, to all of that. That witness, by the way, is a fraudster, a convicted fraudster, and an FBI informant, but never mind. So they brought in this next indictment. So the judge has asked, look, are you saying that all this additional material about the hacking and the events in Iceland is intended to be a crime that you're alleging Assange committed? Tell us what this crime is and tell us whether it forms part of your extradition request. And they've been told to do this by Monday. So we've had a whole hearing, 4 weeks of a hearing, and we still don't know yet exactly why the US says it wants to extradite Assange.
And 52 weeks in jail, by the way. More than 52 weeks.
Yeah.
When his time was up, they kept him in jail. And so it's like 7 years in an embassy, 52 weeks more in the jail. And right now, you have this weird situation where the judge is like, look, you guys need to tell us why you're trying to charge him. That's a profound.
Yeah. I've never heard anything so crazy in my life. And these long years that he was in the embassy, the UN agencies have said that is arbitrary detention,
Yes.
which is a human rights violation. And the conditions under which Assange has been held amount to psychological torture. So he's been tortured. He's been held in arbitrary detention. And as of now, when we are speaking, the US has still not clarified precisely what charge he would be facing if he was sent to the United States. I mean, it's absolutely mad.
Alexander, let me ask you this. Do you think, just over the context of this trial, I've been following, there's a gentleman on Twitter that's been giving a daily recap of what's been taken on. I mean, it's like a virtual trial or whatever. Julian Assange has been sitting in a box and not being able to have really good communications with his lawyer, not in the best of health, like clearly not in the best of health. And yet the trial continues. Do you think...
Well, that's entirely right.
Well, wait, based on your observations, like that you've been watching this also. I mean, you follow politics. You're, like a political like myself. Do you think it's been a fair trial? And do you think that he could get a fair trial in the context of everything else in the powers that actually want to get their hands on him in the United States, despite British law, despite all of the anomalies associated with the trial? Ultimately, do you think it was fair? And do you think the result would be something that's favorable to Assange?
Right. Right. Firstly, on the American case, we had overwhelming testimony during the trial in England that he would not get a fair trial in the US. About the proceedings in England, it is extremely worrying that he was refused bail. That is astonishing to me. He should certainly have been granted bail. There was no reason why he should not be granted bail. And I have to say, like many, many people, I felt right at the beginning that the judge in this case was extremely hostile to him and bending over backwards to assist the US and the Crown Prosecution Service, the British Crown Prosecution Service. So in that respect, I don't think he was getting a fair trial. The only thing I'm going to say is this. Over the course of the hearing, and many people have noticed this, the judge's attitude began to change. And I think what began to annoy her increasingly was the US's repeated changes of position, their inability to say clearly what the case is, and of course, the sheer mountain of evidence that was being produced about the real reasons why the US wants him to be taken to the US, that he has exposed war crimes. And the judge's attitude was starting to shift over the course of the trial. I have to say, I still think she's going to find against him. I think the political pressure is enormous. Political pressure makes a fair trial impossible. So I think she's still going to decide to extradite him. But he has rights of appeal to the High Court and to the Supreme Court. And I think based on what happened in this hearing, I think the prospects of that ought to be good.
So wait, after the extradition hearing, he still has additional resources where he can go. That's actually a pretty good point. So what happens if he is convicted? There's about 30 seconds, and we're going to go to the next break. But do you know, if he's convicted here, what happens from here on out?
Yeah. He appeals to the High Court, which is the most senior court in Britain, and the judges there are far more experienced and far more erudite in the law and far more independent of the political system than the judge who heard this case. So it'd be a completely different type of hearing on legal points, and I would have thought there he would have very good prospects of success.
I see what you mean. The higher court is a fair trial just because the political pressure doesn't necessarily weigh as much on it.
That's exactly right.
Okay, let's do this. Let's go to a break, and we'll be back because I really want to get into Brexit stuff. I've been fascinated by UK politics recently, so I am so glad you could join me. We're talking to Alexander McCurris, editor-in-chief at the Duran. We will be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik. What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief at the Durand. Alexander, let's get into some Brexit news. Now, the EU yesterday basically sent a letter informing Britain that they will be taken to court. Now, despite the fact that that Britain has the UK was supposedly leaving the European Union, they're still under the auspices of the European Court. So Boris Johnson has basically been playing hardball, and he has basically got his electorate to pass a bill that is against the international law of the withdrawal agreement. Have I said that correctly? I was fascinated by this. Boris Johnson has been very boisterous about this.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. That is exactly right.
Now, how did Parliament do that? If Parliament fully understood that what they were doing was against the law, why did they do it? Is this just politics of playing hardball? I mean, certainly he knew they were going to be held under the European Court. He certainly knew that the court was most likely going to rule against him, especially since you're trying to leave Europe. Technical terms. So what's the objective here? And what's the end goal here?
Right.
I mean, basically he's pushing up against the EU.
Yeah, it's a game of bluff and counter-bluff. Boris Johnson was elected Prime Minister because he was going to get Brexit done. His electorate is very, very strong on wanting a very strong Brexit with the EU. They do not want any kind of real substantive connection with the EU. The withdrawal agreement that he rushed through very rapidly last year still allows for a part of the United Kingdom, namely Northern Ireland, to remain for a period of time part of the single market. So in order to get that out of the way, he's changing unilaterally the terms of the withdrawal agreement. The EU, therefore, are bringing this case. What Johnson is going to say, his response is that if the EU brings this case, there will be a no-deal Brexit at the end of this year, which will mean that Britain will cease to be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice and will ignore its decisions, and he will then be able to show that to his hardline Brexit electorate as proof that he is fighting Britain's corner and taking Britain out of the EU. Of course, if he does that, if he defies a decision of the European Court of Justice in that way, if he tears up the withdrawal agreement unilaterally, then any prospect of a deal between Britain and the EU is gone probably for a long time and possibly forever. So it's a reckless policy Johnson has embarked on, but with everything else going wrong for him at the moment, with the COVID-19 crisis escalating rapidly in Britain, with the economy in deep recession, with the Conservative Party increasingly restless as they sense that his leadership is slipping, he has gone for broke by taking this step so that he can show his electors that on Brexit he is firm.
But the country is starting to have Brexit regret over this stuff. I mean, like you said, recession, you're talking about Brexit, and I would imagine Brexit made the COVID recession that much worse. And, I heard recently it was like automakers that were really concerned because they get their parts from outside of Europe. And so it's like, well, if we're going to have tariffs on these things coming in, you're going to basically screw with our margins. And on top of that, all of this basically boils down to Northern Ireland, right? That Boris Johnson has been continuously saying that there's not going to be a border, there's not going to be a border. when in real terms, like, I mean, this has always been the magical thing. Basically, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are part of the European Union. And if you're going to get supplies into Britain, and that country is in the European Union, you're trying to leave, by definition, you're going to need checks. And so I don't know how Boris Johnson expects to make that work without checks. I mean, he was talking about, like, let's use technology, let's use all of this stuff, but all of it speaks of a man that just wants to get something done, not necessarily attend to the real concerns. So did I explain that right? That basically this boils down to Northern Ireland, or let's say Ireland, which may be reunifying because of this. It's in the EU orbit based on this deal. And basically the UK, Britain proper.
You're absolutely right on everything you said, actually. I mean, Boris Johnson, as has become disastrously clear over the course of this year, is a catastrophically bad manager. He's a very, very poor long-term strategist. He never thinks things through. He doesn't really think about impacts to the economy or about how to run, things properly, or what, supply chains. None of that interests him in the slightest. What Johnson is, however, and this is an aspect of his personality that is underestimated, is a very, very skilled and indeed brilliant tactician. He always wins in the short term, even if the result is that he's piling up problems all around him, which will at some point, no doubt, overwhelm him. But that's what he does. He thinks in a very, very short term. He says, I have a problem now because the economy is going wrong. COVID is off the scale. So what do? I do what my base wants me to do. I press ahead with a hardline Brexit, even if that means there's going to be problems with the economy, major problems with the economy, and major problems in Ireland, and indeed possibly also in Scotland, in the very not distant future. Now, the trouble is that it's important to say that opinion in Britain on Brexit seems to continue to be extremely divided. Some people have opposed Brexit right the way through. Other people who supported Brexit have now had second thoughts. But a very large majority of those who supported Brexit still do so and still seem inclined to want a hardline Brexit. It is remarkable, actually, how little the dial has shifted on this in terms of popular attitudes to this question.
Well, what about, okay, that brings up another point then. I mean, if the attitudes haven't shifted, but they're looking at Boris Johnson's leadership. I mean, so the thought is, okay, we can get Brexit done, we just need another person to do it. How are they going to reconcile the Northern Ireland issue? And I said that wrong. I'm sorry. Even when I said it, I was getting it wrong. Northern Ireland is not part of the European Union. Republic of Ireland is part of the European Union. And that's kind of the problem. If goods are going to be coming back and forth, then there needs to be some kind of check on the border. Like, for example, if Boris Johnson says, you know what? I like the taste of those chlorinated chickens. Love them. Lip smacking good chlorinated chickens. And the EU says, yeah, no. Then any kind of trade between those two countries, especially if you're dealing with chickens, has to have some kind of check on whether or not those chickens are coming across the border. I mean, that's just the most natural thing in the world. I don't know how to, I guess my question is, regardless of whether it's Boris Johnson or somebody else, how does that specific issue get resolved?
Well, there's only one way it gets resolved, and it's the way it will be resolved eventually, which is that Northern Ireland leaves the United Kingdom and joins the Republic of Ireland. I was in Ireland about a year ago, and it was very, very clear to me that that is the trend, the trend of opinion in Northern Ireland, that's the way in which things are heading. The point is, English voters who voted Brexit are not interested in Northern Ireland. They don't care about this. This has become very clear. Some people in Britain do care about Northern Ireland. They are overwhelmingly part of the aristocratic establishment, if you like, and they were overwhelmingly pro-Remain. So again, we come up against this divide. I think initially Boris Johnson will have to make a decision. Either he goes ahead with the hard Brexit that he is aiming for and accept that sooner or later Northern Ireland will leave the United Kingdom and will join with the South so that it can remain within the European single market, which it still is. It may not be part of the political structure of the EU, but unlike in the rest of Britain, the European single market still applies in Northern Ireland. So either Northern Ireland leaves the United Kingdom and joins the Republic of Ireland and remains a part of the European single market and becomes again a part of the EU, or he goes back on the very hardline Brexit he is aiming for. But I have to say, I think that it is most unlikely that he will go back on the very hardline Brexit he is aiming for. So Irish unification is now looking to me like an inevitable prospect.
Wow. And maybe it should have been there in the first place, right? I mean,
Well,
interesting.
absolutely.
Oh, go ahead. Or am I being too flippant about that?
No, you're not being flippant about it at all. There's been endless conflicts on the island of Ireland
Right.
ever since the 1920s because of this disastrous decision that was made in 1922 to let the Republic of Ireland become independent, but to hold on to the north. The reason the British did that was partly because obviously there's a lot of Protestants in Northern Ireland, but that wasn't the main reason. The British had major military bases there, and it was very much part of the British Empire's military-industrial complex economy. I mean, it was where a lot of Britain's shipbuilding was based and where the Royal Navy ships used to be built. That is no longer the case anymore. So that calculus has changed, and the British don't have the need to hold on to Northern Ireland in the same way. But it was disastrous that Ireland was ever divided in the first place. And hopefully, when it is united, that conflict, which has caused so much grief and trouble and death and misery, will finally be ended.
Yeah, it seems that the straightforward way of solving this issue is basically let
Yeah.
Ireland and Northern Ireland reunify.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, there's no issue with the Northern Irish border.
And English opinion is definitely moving in that direction. I mean, there have been opinion polls which show that as far as English voters who support Brexit are concerned, if the price of a Brexit is losing Northern Ireland, then so be it. They don't care.
They're willing to accept it.
They're-
Well, does that also apply to Scotland? I mean, is Britain really willing to go it alone in a hostile world?
This is. I think Scotland is a completely different thing. Believe it or not, there are opinion polls which show that a lot of English voters would be prepared to see Scotland go in order to escape the EU. But I think that this would be a far more distressing and upsetting event for people right across England and, of course, the political class in London.
I do agree with you. It just seems like a different animal of sorts. But look, Alexander McCurris, editor-in-chief at The Duran, thank you for joining us. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
lines.
I can't hear you.
What live from the divided states of America? Welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. And the left corner today, at the very least from this standpoint, will be the only corner that you guys hear from. Now that said though, I would like you guys to absolutely feel free to call in and engage. This number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. You can send chat, tweets. We are happy to engage. Let's go to headlines. In the news, President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump were in quarantine at the White House early Friday after receiving word that they had tested positive for COVID-19. The president confirmed the test results in a Twitter message, of course, shortly before 1 a.m. Eastern. Trump tweeted, "Tonight, Flotus and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately." What does this mean for the election? Is that not the fascinating question? And what does this mean if Donald Trump actually gets significantly ill? We're talking about a 70-something-year-old man with the mortality rates are not all that high for a person of his size and his portly stature. So we don't know. There are a bunch of question marks that are over top of this. I do think it's also funny that he starts off, "The Flotus and I tested positive." I like the fact that he doesn't just say, "I tested positive, my wife also." But whatever, that's just a text thing. Mr. Trump is not the first world leader to get infected. There are plenty of right-wing world leaders that have also gotten infected. Boris Johnson, President Jair Bolsonaro have both tested positive. Now, again, the interesting thing is what happens. Is Mike Pence going to take charge if things get kind of bad? And what happens if Pence get infected? Or we find out that Pence is infected? Does Nancy Pelosi take over? This could be a very interesting time in an already very interesting year. So this is one of those things of basically stay tuned. The stock market fell early in the morning after the announcement of Trump. The coronavirus has infected 7.2 million Americans, killing more than 200,000 of them. If I'm not mistaken, the number is 207,000. Mississippi became the first state in the union to lift a mask mandate to curb the spread of the coronavirus as cases fell. If I'm not mistaken, the death toll in Mississippi is extremely high. Look, the COVID-19 virus has hit this country and has rocked this country. And it has basically reshaped, even from the standpoint of the way retail or the way we go to our stores and get our businesses, everything else. But it's also, if nothing else, from a standpoint of a person looking at their government and how their government responds to these type of difficulties and having their response as being some experiential measure of competence, we have failed miserably. And a lot of that can be placed at the doorstep of the President of the United States. So there will be people who will weep for Trump. I don't know why. But Trump has caused a lot of misery, a lot of death, and a lot of economic pain in this country as a result of his inability to act, his incompetence, his downplaying it, his not necessarily knowing how to use the office of the presidency to the maximum benefit of the American public, and yet looting the treasury while the country was on fire. Donald Trump is infected with COVID-19. And as I said earlier, there is a God. The House passed a $2.2 trillion Democratic coronavirus stimulus plan on Thursday night, even as Democrats in the Trump administration struggled to strike a relief deal. The chamber approved the legislation in a 214-207 vote. 18 Democrats voted against the measure as lawmakers in a competitive district grow wary of the ongoing impasse over aid. Now, you must understand there are some Republican lawmakers that are getting terrified that their not voting is going to adversely affect them in their races coming up, and as such have become a little bit more amenable to trying to get a deal. That's called political pressure. That's called them being terrified and them responding and acting accordingly to that terror, to changing their point of view to something that may make the public less angry at them. When I make this argument that lefties should act the same way, this is proof of concept. The moment that you have a large number of people that are angry at you, that you understand and believe can adversely affect your ability to get elected, in that moment, those people have power. And the political space is conforming to that power. My argument to Democrats, my argument to progressives, my argument to lefties, the battered spouse of the political spectrum, is to do the same. To be very clear, to be very angry. 30 million people are out of a job. All of these people are at food banks. How many are without health care? What, over 30 million or so? It is our responsibility, ethically, morally, even I would argue philosophically, to do Medicare for all, especially in this very specific moment. But that is not what happens, because what the Democrats understand is they have no need to do it. Whether they support it or not, at the end of the day, they believe that that vote is captured. And as long as Joe Biden believes that he has this in the bag, nothing that you want matters. You are utterly and entirely irrelevant. And unfortunately, many lefties accept that internally. Lead a man to the back door long enough, even when it's not available, he will seek it out. In this very specific case, this bill is probably not going to get through the Republican Senate. And Mitch McConnell has opposed the legislation as his caucus resists spending trillions more on federal response to the pandemic. And McConnell has basically said, I need a basic consensus on this before I put this legislation up. Meaning that those people at the food banks, those people without a job, those people who are being evicted from their homes, those people who can't afford health care in the midst of a pandemic, those people who have family members that were burned in those fires or had to deal with the other complications of our reality in the COVID-19 crisis, they will go unassisted by a federal government to which they pay taxes into and expect, under this notion of any level of a notion of a social contract, the government to do something different. This is a moment where, in addition to all of the tragedies and the changes that COVID made, it's a wake-up time. It's to look at what does a rational government do versus what did your government do? And why is there a skew between those things? It's a valid question. A high-ranking Vatican official said Wednesday that Pope Francis would not meet with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during the visit to Rome, citing the proximity to the U.S. general election in November. While he didn't meet with Francis, Pompeo met with Vatican officials on Thursday, including Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and Archbishop Richard Gallagher, the Holy See's foreign minister. Vatican news agency reported the 45-minute encounter was cordial, and both parties discussed their respective stances on China. The Pope didn't meet with him because the Pope understood that he was being used as a political prop, and the Pope, aware of that, did not want to be used as a political prop, especially by the likes of a man like Mike Pompeo, who stood before a crowd and say, I cheat and lie and steal for a living. And by the way, got applause for it. Talk about sick incentives. On Sunday, a territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan reignited and is now threatening to engulf the whole region. Clashes raged between Armenia and Azerbaijani forces on Friday, despite calls all across the world, actually, for a ceasefire, as French President Emmanuel Macron warned Turkey against the alleged deployment of jihadists to the war zone. Now, understand, this is playbook. Joe Biden, at one point, has a speech where he's telling about all of the U.S. allies that were willing to spend billions to topple Assad. We eventually add our own selves into that, and based on New York Times reporting, have also spent a ton of money, if I'm not mistaken, more than $1 billion, to try to do the same. Buying people from countries that are dirt poor is a way of doing that. Those people are in a situation where their life and their country is not offering opportunities. And here's an opportunity, based on the cash that I'm getting, to go to somewhere else and do very bad things. I've spoken to people in Kenya who said the exact same thing, personally, to me while I was there. And so the jihadist thing is typical playbook of nations. Turkey, of course, was doing this. The United States, of course, was doing this. And I would not be shocked. I don't know French politics in a sense, but I would not be shocked if French forces in some way was doing the same. At the end of the day, Macron is warning Turkey against sending jihadists into this war zone. Macron said intelligence reports had established that 300 fighters from jihadist groups, quote unquote, in Syria had passed through Turkey en route to Azerbaijan, saying it's a red line has been crossed, that a red line has been crossed, and demanding an explanation. What is France going to do? What is France going to do? Is France really going to get involved in a larger conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Or is France just popping off at the mouth? Does Macron not have enough problems in his own country before getting involved in other countries? The problem is everyone wants this to resolve itself. No one wants for this to get into a larger conflict. But regardless of what people want, this is a question of power. If these two countries were always hundreds of years at the barrel of a gun, based on the reporting and based on the information read, then that means that it was never resolved. The barrel of a gun where these two countries are, it's only a moment. For when these countries think that the power distribution is equal, beyond that point, you get into a change of perspectives. And that seems to be what's taking place. Everybody wants it to resolve, but it seems like the two countries that are involved are not there yet. Nearly 200 people have been confirmed killed, including more than 30 civilians, and their fears of fighting expanding into an all-out multi-front war that could suck in the regional powers of Turkey and Russia. Why? Because basically, Russia's position in this is masterfully complicated and is fascinating politics, if I'm being bluntly honest. Basically, you are allies to both. You don't want these two countries to get into a conflict because both of these countries at one point were part of the Soviet Union, and you are basically associated with both. So at one point, Russia was giving weapons to both, trying to keep a certain level of equality. However, it doesn't seem like that equality is basically lasted. Russia's perspective is, look, neutrality. The catch here is, though, that Russia has this tacit protection of Armenia. By the same token, the last thing they want to do is get dragged into a larger conflict. Hence, everybody be cool and negotiations and discussions to try to bring down the heat in this. If Azerbaijan crosses into Armenian territory, Russia is compelled to act. Short of that, it's complicated. And from reading what the prime minister in Azerbaijan and the prime minister in Armenia are saying, basically one says this is our territory, we want our territory. The other one says acting as if they're an existential threat. It's complicated. And, this is not for me to take a side one way or the other. It's more so just trying to explain why the complication exists. Turkey is a NATO nation that is poised against Russia. If Turkey is attacked, or if there's a conflict between the two, this does not necessarily mean that the articles will be activated. But it is, by any measure, problematic, to put it mildly. And that is not a reality that I think anybody, or at least I don't, want to take place. Last but not least, Chinese President Xi Jinping last week committed his country to carbon neutrality by 2060. China has an anti-poverty policy, believe it or not, to eliminate extreme poverty by the end of this year. In spite of the COVID crisis, they will likely still meet that target. We have nothing like this in the United States. Put that in perspective for the moment. The richest country on the planet does not have an official policy of ending poverty in this country and bringing everybody up to a certain lowest common denominator. Do you care about your fellow brother? And you realize that whether or not you care about this other person, that other person is functioning in society just like you, with hopes and dreams and aspirations of things that they want, things that they need. And they are attuned to this world, be it alienated from it or in line with it, based upon environmental circumstances. Meaning, if you ensure that people have the things that they need as they grow up in your society, that don't get alienated to the society itself. I remember having a conversation with a man in Denmark who said, dude, why does your country basically rape the employees like that? You create hostility. And I had nothing to say, but yeah, you're right. They create hostility. This goes, though, into solar energy and carbon neutrality. China took a small but tangible step in achieving this goal as the country's biggest ever solar power station was connected to the grid in northwest province of Qihai. I may be pronouncing them wrong. I apologize if I am. The solar park has a capacity of 2.2 gigawatts That makes it the second biggest in the world, narrowly trailing behind India's 2.245 gigawatt Balda solar park. Until now, China's biggest solar station was the Tianjin Desert Solar Park with a capacity of 1.54 gigawatts. For comparison, the United States has a massively small 579 megawatts. This is Fault Lines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am typically joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, but Shane is not feeling all that well, so I am running this ship. We're coming to you live, or I am coming to you live. I'm so used to him being here. I'm coming to you live out of the station from Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can always catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking it around in Kansas City, 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Also, if you are digging what I am putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, Fault Lines, give us a like, and share the content. We're always trying to grow and expand, particularly this channel. If you guys want to join in on the conversation, you can always send the chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement on this show makes the show what it is. So definitely don't be shy, critical, in agreement. Feel free to call in, whatever you want to talk about. So what I want to talk about, in lieu of anybody else talking about anything, has to do with the Republicans and them getting a little skittish, a little scared, some of them are, in districts that they're going to have to go back to and explain, look person in the face, I didn't vote for that bill that was going to ensure that you were going to be intact because of X or Y. So now, a little concerned, they want to be able to make this vote. McConnell will not bring it up for a vote. Now, what I want to talk about is the impetus for that. Meaning, I want to get into why would Republicans who were against this bill all of a sudden come to Jesus. And the argument that I am making is the reason they're coming to Jesus is because of public pressure. Now, understand what I mean. Oftentimes, the public is out of the political space. The public and what the public wants amounts, I think it was like one of the studies, or Princeton study, if I'm not mistaken, to like statistical noise. Meaning, your parties have gamed the system to such an extent where 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. What do you think that incentivizes? You tell me. If you have a situation where you have dollars and pitchforks, and there are no pitchforks, there are only dollars, and this goes on for 40 years, and you get the ability to make an argument that a group, multiple groups, accepts. It is not the job of me to get your vote. It is your job to get mine. I mean, to basically throw yourself at me so I can beat whatever Republican. Now, why is this way? Understand, when those guys are going back in there terrified that they're going to lose that race, that's something that the left should pay attention to. That's something that progressive Democrats should pay attention to. This notion that a political space cares about their voters. How weird, how strange, how representative of a democracy. That is what it should look like. Your political leader should care. That should not be an anomaly. That should be the operating procedure. And the reason it becomes the operating procedure is not because the candidates want it. The candidates were perfectly willing to blow off this vote. They were perfectly willing to not deal with the material concerns, to allow the Treasury to be looted, to give $1,200 and going about this kind of theatrical surface, to go into the pageants, whether Democrat and Republican. Democrats bringing on Republicans to attack lefties. What the public wants, who cares? That's not normal. That is not indicative of a democracy where they blow off what the public wants. And let's deal with the Democrats for the moment, because that's the part that I kind of want to make the point on. You have Joe Biden in a recent question. Now, Joe Biden on the debate stage yesterday, or a few days ago, made every instance that Trump attacked him. And look, I said Trump won the debate, but it's an empty win. I said Trump won the debate because Trump had a plan, he had a strategy, he had something that he wanted to accomplish, and he had something that he wanted to do in regards to Biden. I want to get Joe Biden to repudiate the left over and over and over and over again. Green New Deal, nope. Medicare fund, nope. And at one point, defund the police, nope. I'm not for any of that stuff. My name is Joe Biden. And people should have known that. That's called politics. This idea of telling people whatever they want to hear in the primaries. And then by the time you get out the primaries, you change, you pivot. Because the primaries at that point is about mano a mano. It's tribal. And so the fact that I've lied to you flagrantly for the last X number of months in order to get past opposition that you actually agree with the policies on matters less, because this guy's a maniac, this guy's an ogre, this guy's going to destroy America, and so we got to just vote for Biden. He knows that. He understands that. He understands that that is the typical way politics works because he's been in politics for like 47 years. Now, the audience looks at that and accepts it. Because at the end of the day, you have nowhere else to go, which is the mantra. Joe Biden was asked by the press, straightforward, hey, by you repudiating all of those policies of the left, do you think that you might be moving too far to the center? And Joe Biden said, I won the primary, right? Now, the catch with this is, yes, you indeed won the primary on an electability argument. The problem with this is a large number of people didn't vote for you. They didn't vote for you. You didn't get their votes. You didn't secure their votes. You have a large number of youth, a large number of people of color that did not go to the polls and vote for you. They voted for Sanders. Now, you making the argument that you won the primary is fine, but you still have a bunch of people that you didn't get. Now, you're assuming they're going to vote for you. So much so that, again, right, if you don't vote for me, you're not even black, based on what Joe Biden has said. So understand what I'm saying here. You are a captured vote. Now, this has been taking place for the last 40 and 50 years, and I can forgive the left for this for the last 40 and 50 years, but not in 2020. 2020 is distinct. In 2020, you won the argument. Carter G. Woodson said, lead a man to the back door long enough, the man will seek the back door out if it's not available to him. It's paraphrasing, but basically, if you marginalize, undermine, subvert, keep a person in a horrible situation for a period of time, that person will come to think that situation is normal. And many of them will seek that weird, horrible situation out if it's not available. I'm making the point that the perspective of the left and progressive Democrats are warped, utterly backwards. And it's built that way for the last 40 or 50 years where you were marginalized. And 2020 was different. What happened in 2020? You learned that A, the Democratic Party was willing to tank it in order to stop you. You don't believe me? Go back and look at the debate where all of the Democrats are on stage. Sanders says, are you going to accept? Meaning, if somebody else gets the number of delegates, are you going to back him? Sanders says yes. Everybody else on stage says no. Everybody on stage. And what that means is that each and every one of those Democrats full well understood that they would have no opportunity to win this race because no lefty would back them if they rip it out of Sanders' hands. On the second side of that, you also learn that your policies are popular. Medicare for all climbed. It was unthought of in 2008. And this time, right now, 67 or 69% for the rest of America. 88% for Democrats. Now, you as a lefty, say for the moment you don't take any other policy, but you should take other policies because you've won the policy arguments across the board. Expansion of Social Security, elimination of student debt, all of these things. You won these arguments. And in the context of the Democratic Party, you won them by a large share. And despite winning the policy argument, 88% within the party, the moment that Sanders loses, you bend the knee. It's as if you believe that the only political space available to you is that. The political space is purely conceptual. None of those laws are real in real terms. What makes them real is the force that can be applied to the individual to force them to conform, not to mention the other people that kind of agree with the laws. I'm making the point that the political space is just one conceptual space within the context of plenty of things. You just need to find a way to impede the political system, to intersect it, to be able to place your will and apply some level of leverage in order to force it to be in your interest. What did those Republicans do when they had to go back and they had to confront people who they think are going to be angry and make them lose their seat? I'm making the point that your reality should be the same. You should engage the political space from the standpoint of the left and make one basic argument that is flat fact infinitely true. It is the responsibility, philosophically, legally, of the candidate to get my vote. And if you have 30 million people that when Sanders lost, instead of Sanders bending the knee, instead of AOC bending the knee, instead of all of these people immediately turning around, okay, we're going to back Biden, all of this tough talk goes away in a heartbeat, even radicals. And they missed the point that my argument is not a rah-rah for Trump. My argument is a point of your job as a person is to be a patriot and to hold your candidate accountable. And the fact that you ended up with Trump and Biden on that debate stage is an exact reason why you are to hold your candidates accountable. Otherwise, it is a race to the bottom. 2020 was the year that you win 88% support for a Medicare for All program in the midst of a pandemic with over 30 million people without their health care. And your response to that is, all right, Bernie lost, so that's it. Are you backing a party or are you backing the policy? Which one is it? There's a dramatic difference. If 30 million people said, look, we're backing Medicare for All, it is unconscionable that we even need to push the party to make this argument. Biden said he'd veto it. That's unconscionable. It's unethical. It's even immoral. You need to do something tangibly, in real terms, about all of these people without health care. And fact of the matter is Obamacare may be torched in a few months. Medicare for All is a policy that the overwhelming majority of Americans have accepted. 20 Democrats was on stage taking shots at it, and it still come out with the level of 88% support. If you and the party is willing to tank it till maniac, a man who you call the end of all things, the blackness, the darkened sky, the apocalypse with legs. If indeed you are saying that that man is that bad, that it is unconscionable that the Democratic Party doesn't accept a Medicare for All program that would organically bring the party together and organically put energy behind it. You understand all of these lefties that bent the knee, that bent over immediately, that you're pushing Biden, you're going after Biden, you're refusing to accept what he's putting. It's politics. That's how it's done. That force, that leverage. Why do you think Boris Johnson passed a law that was against the European courts? Because he was willing to push it, because that's his job as a politician. I am making the point that the job of the left is to do the same. And that is not what the left does. The left does the opposite. The left, over 40 years, capitulates. Your argument the day the Sanders lost, even before that, should have been, this is the policy that the American public wants. This is the policy that the American public needs. And this is the policy that 30 million, 40 million of us are accepting. Every Democrat, progressive Democrat, broken horse in the Democratic Party should have also said, we agree with them. You might lose. And in the context of that, being able to get the party to have a second thought. You've issued a demand. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And there's your demand. It is up for the Democratic Party to accept or deny that demand. But if they deny that demand and they're willing to tank it, as opposed to appropriating the policies that would bring people together and beat a monster and maniac, then there are questions for you to ask about whether you are indeed in a representative government. If a country with a party with 88% support for a particular policy tanks it, we don't want to appropriate it. We don't like the standard that is being set by you forcing us to do this. Then you have qualms and questions about your representative government and whether you're in a representative government. Understand that Trump wins under that scenario. But under that scenario, the Democratic Party was willing to tank it to a man who they call a maniac as opposed to appropriating policy that would have organically brought the country together in the midst of a pandemic with 200,000 people dead and 7 million people infected. That is your paltry Democratic Party and the paucity of ideas. But those paucity ideas are only there because there's no accountability from the standpoint of the left to hold that party accountable. I'm making a point to you that these things could be different. 2020 could have been different. But we laid down. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here alone today. Shane Stranahan is not necessarily feeling all that well, so I am taking reins of the ship alone. We're joined by Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, articles and essays on socialism. Caleb, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm doing so far so good. I'm live, kicking, making it, energized, on point and focused today since I'm doing it on my own. So I really do appreciate you coming on. You have a new book out, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. So explain to the audience what that book is about. And I think, look, it's timely, right? Kamala Harris is the vice president. And let's be very honest, it's very possible Joe Biden is not going to make it the 4 years. We know what the presidency does. That's not me being cruel. That's me being just honest. Look at Obama in the beginning and look at Obama after. Trump has been weird and bucked the trend on that, but he's gotten more portly. But from the standpoint of Biden, when I saw Biden pick Kamala Harris, I knew that Kamala Harris seemed to be the pick that the party wanted anyway. And by attaching her to Joe Biden, and what's his name said, yeah, blacks should be happy because they got Kamala Harris. How insulting in general. But in real terms, Kamala Harris may, in the first term, end up being president. And so an analysis and a talk about her is just as important as any conversation about Joe Biden. And I think that's the thing that we miss. Joe Biden may be able to make it to the White House, but the person who may be in that White House may be somebody who's not get the scrutiny that they deserve considering the condition of Biden. What do you think about that? Am I being too harsh in my appraisal? Or do you think, yeah, there's something to that? It's most likely true that Kamala Harris could likely, potentially end up in the White House.
Oh, I'd say there's a very, very good chance that she could be president. Even if she doesn't win along with Biden in November, there's a very good chance she could be president at some future date. She's someone that the political elites of the United States have really put a lot of time and money behind. And let's recall that her presidential campaign was going pretty well. She was considered one of the front runners until Tulsi Gabbard took a moment on national TV, a moment of her limited time. Tulsi Gabbard never had really the amount of time that other candidates got. Tulsi Gabbard used her limited time to particularly go after Kamala Harris and expose her record as a prosecutor, and expose, the fact that she had prosecuted people for smoking marijuana and then laughed about it when asked if she'd ever done it herself. The fact that she had tried to keep an innocent man on death row. Those are Gabbard's words. After the American people saw Tulsi Gabbard's, kind of takedown of Kamala Harris, she dropped in the polls. That was it. At the time, the media didn't really want to acknowledge it, but this was probably one of the biggest political takedowns we've ever seen.
It was phenomenal. I mean, Kamala Harris was in the number 3-4 spot at one point. I mean, she literally popped up in the polls after she went after Joe Biden. I was that little girl, Joe Biden. It was that scene. And then you find out a few days later, well, she also has the same position as Joe Biden. Political theater. She even got Joe Biden to argue states' rights. And Joe Biden had no clue what he was talking about. If you're arguing states' rights, a state right to do what? That's been the way we're talking about it. And typically when we talk about segregation and you have that type of stuff and these governors that were fighting for their schools, states' rights. A state's right to do what? States' rights to basically keep things the way they are. And for Joe Biden to be arguing that in a conversation about busing and civil rights and segregation, oh, that's horrendous. And yet, there he was doing it. But, like you said, the very next debate, Kamala Harris gets taken apart in 60 seconds by Tulsi Gabbard. And Tulsi Gabbard basically goes down the list, like you said. I mean, you've kept people in prison on death row despite the judge warning. I mean, people groaned audibly when she said that. I mean, the laughing at pot smokers. I mean, you're at a Democratic primary. They're not going to be for that. Even the firefighter stuff, where you're getting people to fight fires for pennies. It's astonishing, right? And so I do agree with you that it is very important for an analysis of Kamala. What made you write this book? What was the thing that got you to say, you know what, I'm going to write this book?
Well, the more you look into Kamala Harris's life story, the more confusing and disturbing it is, right? Her record as a prosecutor in California, as California's state attorney general, involved, some pretty horrendous stuff. Records of withholding evidence to try and get people convicted. The Attorney General's office of California was constantly being criticized by the courts for its actions, basically, trying to lock up as many people as possible. Her career as a prosecutor, she rose into prominence during the 1990s when California's rate of incarceration was skyrocketing and just rising and rising and rising. Now, that might all make sense, right, if she came out of what you might call the thin blue line milieu, right? There's a lot of people in the United States that are, part of the, related to police officers themselves. You have the Fraternal Order of Police. And those folks have a specific worldview. They think we're too soft on criminals. They think our justice system is rigged. We have too many civil liberties. And that milieu, her behavior might make sense in that context. However, if you look at Kamala Harris's background, both of her parents met, and they met at civil rights marches. She grew up on the organized left. I mean, she talks about in her memoir, Truth We Hold, how she spent much of her childhood at a place called Rainbow Sign, that was a cultural center, of the African American community in Oakland, California, and that she came out of the organized left. She knew all about the history of racism. She knew all about the prison industrial complex, but yet she still chose the career path that she chose. And that was quite disturbing to me when I read about it. So I decided I should start doing some investigation. And I basically, this is not a biography of Kamala Harris. This is not. This is me using Kamala Harris to make some points, and understanding the history of leftism in the United States, understanding the psychological motivations behind politics, and also understanding the different factions competing within the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris was selected by the Hillary Clinton State Department faction. Hillary Clinton, she ran the U.S. State Department during Obama's first term. And the world is still reeling from the aftermath of what Hillary Clinton did when she ran the State Department. She oversaw a coup in Honduras. She oversaw the destabilization of Libya.
Yeah, the murder of Gaddafi.
Syria.
Yeah, the murder of Gaddafi. Laughed at Gaddafi's murder.
Right. And furthermore, the Obama administration tried to restrain the Hillary Clinton State Department. Hillary Clinton worked explicitly with Silicon Valley to foment regime change. And early on, during the Hillary Clinton State Department years, early on, Jared Andrew Cohen, who worked with Hillary Clinton, he went to Twitter and asked them to, change some of their operations in order to help destabilize Iran and support protests there. And the Obama administration heard about this and actually tried to fire Jared Andrew Cohen, but Hillary Clinton protected him. and that the Hillary Clinton State Department, they came in with this regime change strategy, destabilizing the world, trying to foment unrest around the world, working with Silicon Valley and social media to do it. They came in with that strategy. And on many instances, you can see Obama and Joe Biden trying to restrain the Hillary Clinton State Department from doing that and fearing the disastrous consencoses.
But they mostly went along with it. I mean, Hillary Clinton may be a bit of a hawk in the Democratic Party, but she's normal, for all things being equal. Is it fair to say that if you're looking at Libya, Syria, like you said, Honduras, at that point, if you're talking about, adding more troops into some African countries, I mean, Obama had, 7 wars going or something insane like that? I mean, it didn't seem like they restrained her all that much. It seemed like these guys were on target.
Well, Obama, when asked about his presidency, Obama said that his worst decision was going into Libya, something Hillary Clinton pushed him to do, going into Libya without a clear plan. Obama also said that his best decision was in 2013 when he was able to not attack the Syrian government with cruise missiles, when the entire U.S. political establishment was pushing Obama to unleash cruise missiles against Syria in 2013, when he managed to not do that and instead had the Syrian government turn over their chemical weapons and negotiated that deal.
But that was only because the Russian government intervened to give another option to Obama. Obama would have passed that red line.
Oh, certainly. And if you look at it, Obama got rid of Hillary Clinton during his second term, and he brought in John Kerry. And what John Kerry focused on was doing the Iran deal and doing relations with Cuba. And that, Obama, Biden, John Kerry, these are just kind of old school liberals. These are guys that, yes, they'll go along with this strategy. They'll go along with the regime changers. But they're just kind of old school liberals. They're just kind of managers. They just want to get things done. But there is a particular faction within the American elite in Silicon Valley and elsewhere that really had embedded itself in the U.S. State Department and the Hillary Clinton State Department, their policies, the way they were able to manipulate the events of the Arab Spring to serve U.S. foreign policy. They had very long-term consequences. And it was revealed. And it's just almost well known. I mean, no one really disputes this, that when it became clear that Hillary Clinton could not run in 2020 as much as she wanted to, that Hillary Clinton's financial backers, they had meetings in the Hamptons in Long Island, New York, and they picked Kamala Harris. And that all the major Clinton donors and backers, this particular faction, they put their money behind Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris represents the Hillary Clinton State Department.
That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. The argument or the conversation, even though it's taking place from the standpoint of Joe Biden, you have to add Kamala Harris. Look, I know people don't want to be impolite. Fair enough. But the reality of it is Joe Biden is not the man. He is a wisp of himself just 4 years ago. And so it's an honest conversation to say, it's likely he may not make it 4 years, or he may not even be up for it for 1 or 2 years, depending upon the stress of the presidency. And so you would think that Kamala Harris would get a lot more of a review than just, hey, they got a black woman into this particular process. It's like, it seems to be bizarre that they accept this argument that Joe Biden is somehow going to last, like as a flat fact, all 4 years. No, you should be investigating Kamala Harris. So I am absolutely happy that you're doing that. Let's do this. Let's take a break, and we'll be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, articles and essays on socialism. We're talking about Kamala Harris. He has a new book out, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook. or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with Caleb Maupin. I do want to put out a little bit of news that has just come out, so I want to thank my producer, Raheem. New York Times is reporting that the Vice President Mike Pence has tested negative for COVID. Markets rattled by Trump positive tests. Now, Caleb, the wild part about this is that we don't know what happens now. If Trump gets ill, like seriously ill, Mike Pence will most likely take it. If Trump dies, I mean, we are talking about a 70-some portly, not necessarily in the best of shape man, elderly. If he dies, Mike Pence will most likely take over. And if Mike Pence gets to run in the race against Joe Biden, what happens? And I don't entirely have an answer for that. So I'm going to give that to you. What happens under that scenario with Mike Pence as opposed to Donald Trump taking over the reins? Does it affect the race? Does it change the race? Or is Mike Pence a fundamentally different energy than Trump?
I would say that certainly changes the race. I mean, if Trump is out and it becomes Pence versus the Democrats, there's no question that Biden and Kamala Harris will win if it becomes a Pence race, in my prediction. Mike Pence just doesn't have the wild card, charisma that Trump has. Mike Pence is seen as just kind of a regular figure from the establishment. He's a religious right Republican. He was a conservative talk show host in Indiana, and then he became governor, and then he became president. And he's just a deeply conservative guy, and that's what he's about. And Trump has got the image of kind of a wild card who is fighting the establishment, has his own style, etc. And Pence just doesn't devote that energy.
No, I agree with you. I think it's a fundamental shift, like in the way things pursue themselves. I want to go back to Kamala Harris for the moment. What did you said it was somewhat disturbing at times. What changed her from a lefty? Because like you said, at some point she was part of the left in regards to her ideology and framing of the world and the things she would say. What made that shift? I know how Obama, when people were telling about him, Obama was very driven. And he took a very specific perspective in what he needed to do to be president, even getting rid of his white girlfriend, with the idea that I won't be accepted as such. What did Kamala Harris, what changed her in her purview in regards to her purview of the world?
Well, I can't directly answer that. I can't get inside her mind. I don't know when her views, completely shifted. And now she's trying to present herself as a leftist now. I mean, she's rewriting history and trying to say, she's all about Black Lives Matter. She became a prosecutor just so she could fight for Black lives, et cetera, which is just, if you look at her legacy and her record, that's ridiculous.
Warped. That's warped.
I think, I think if one of the key things I get into in the book is her father, Donald Harris. Now, she talks at length about her mother, Shamala Gopalan. She talks about her mother a lot. Her mother is from India, was a cancer researcher, kind of a feminist pioneer. She eulogizes her mother. She's almost made her among Kamala Harris's supporters. Kamala's deceased mother is kind of a saint. But her father, who is still living, Donald Harris, very little is said about him. And if you look into the details, Kamala and her father are pretty much estranged from each other. They don't speak to each other. There was a divorce that took place when she was a child. Her father, Donald Harris, is an economics professor. He taught at Stanford University, and he drew heavily from Marx. To call him a communist is a huge exaggeration. But he's a Marxian economist, and he was an advisor to various prime ministers of Jamaica. And when she made a joke on the Breakfast Club radio program about smoking weed, they asked her if she'd ever smoked weed, and she said, "Half my family's from Jamaica. What do you think?" Her father was so infuriated that he spoke up and denounced her campaign and called it a travesty of identity politics. And disassociated his entire family from it. Her entire Jamaican family has denounced her and is opposing her campaign. And never have we heard the relatives of anyone running for president speak so vehemently against them. I mean, this is crazy. You look into the statements made by Donald Harris, and then you read his essay he wrote, Reflections of a Jamaican Father. And you see a side of Kamala Harris's upbringing that she would very much like to conceal. In her book, The Truths We Hold, she says the only thing that her parents fought over during the divorce was the books. However, if you read Donald Harris's essay, there was a custody battle in the courts of Oakland, California. And Donald Harris very much feels that because he was an African-American man or a Caribbean-American man, that the courts very much were biased against him, even though he was an academic, and that he lost custody of his daughters unfairly. There's a lot there to look into, and you know, that is a particular point of interest in the book. But it seems that the relationship between Kamala and her father and the real resentment and tension between the two of them, you know, may have driven Kamala, you know, to be the kind of vindictive, sadistic prosecutor she became. And I think there are many things that would point to such facts if you read like little hints she's left for us in her autobiography and elsewhere.
You know, the identity politics. I agree with her dad. Like, for Clyburn to basically say that African Americans who are complaining that the Democrats are taking advantage of them or taking them for granted or exploiting them. And Clyburn basically argues, hey, you got Kamala Harris. Shut up about all that taking advantage stuff. As if somehow her blackness or whatever she, you know, her heritage is somehow indicative of material gains that the population receives. Meaning Obama's blackness didn't stop him from getting 95% of the income gains to the top 1% or throwing his body in for the Wall Street. These were issues of class, not issues of identity. And oftentimes the Democratic Party has been able to use issues of identity in lieu of economics. You know, back in the old days, they didn't necessarily separate this notion of race and economics. At least King didn't when he was giving his speeches. And the Democratic Party has basically and fundamentally broken black politics and any notion of power in those politics. I mean, imagine for the moment. You have a constituency that votes 90%, and yet is powerless in that vote. Like, it's astonishing. And that's not just African Americans. There's also lefties and many Hispanics. I mean, the majority of the people who are voting for Biden are doing so, not because of who Biden is or any kind of affirmative message. They're doing it, getting rid of Trump. They're terrified. Let me ask you this. What is a socialist analysis of this? Like, you have America, your book, City Builders and Vandals, Our Age, Essays on Socialism. What is an appraisal of our society and the way this society has devolved, where you end up, despite all of these emergencies, larger than what the Great Depression was, and yet two men who are radically incapable of dealing with it?
Well, you know, I make this point once again in the new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. I make the same point that I make in my City Builders and Vandals book, which is that socialism is a constructive ideology. It's about society coming together, organizing the economy for public good, planning out, you know, goods and services, the means of production being controlled by society. It is a collectivist ideology, and it is about building and constructing and getting to a better world. But there have been covert efforts to manipulate left-wing politics, to make left-wing politics about people releasing their impulses, right? And about people, you know, giving people permission to unleash their rage and their desire for revenge, desire for, you know, sexual freedom, etc. And that there has been kind of a distortion and a hijacking of the politics of the revolutionary intelligentsia. And that, you know, when you see this clip of Kamala Harris, very famous clip of her speaking at the Commonwealth Club of California, and she laughed about the fact that she jailed the parents of children who were truant from school.
Utterly
right?
disgusting. Utterly disgusting.
Yeah.
I wish we had that clip so people can get a real sense of it. Basically, just a snapshot of it. Kamala Harris was being asked about, I think they were like, you know, success stories. And she's giggling, laughing her way through, threatening and terrifying a mother who's homeless and have kids that can't go to school and threatening that mother with jail. Now, the fact that she's laughing through this story is problematic in and of itself. And even the notion that this mom's issue was the kids not going to school as opposed to her being homeless. I mean, that clip was astonishing. Honestly, it is.
It was very astonishing if you watch the clip. And, before she gets into her tirade about why she did it, she says, I would be nowhere if it weren't for the fact that I got an education. Well, as a prosecutor, it's not supposed to be about you, Kamala. It's not supposed to be about your feelings, right? And she talks about how she had a quote unquote big stick with which she could use as a prosecutor. And there is this kind of she sees this as kind of the fulfillment of releasing her rage, right? This is her revenge for whatever pain exists in her childhood. And there's something psychological going on there. And in the book, I fit that in with kind of the way leftist politics has been distorted, that when it becomes just about giving people permission to unleash their rage, it becomes about, lifting restraints on impulses. This is kind of what's going on. At the end of the day, the children whose parents went to jail because they went to school, they didn't benefit from that. They didn't have a better life. Yes, kids need to be in school, but if you lock their parents up, that doesn't improve their life. But it's not about actually helping those kids. It's about taking revenge against those parents. And, you take a look at Libya. The people of Libya did not benefit from the U.S. intervention in 2011 that toppled the most prosperous government on the African continent. The people of Syria haven't benefited from this. But again, it's not really about helping the people of Syria or helping the people of Libya. It's about destroying. It's about taking revenge against someone you perceive as an oppressor. And that this kind of distortion of left-wing politics, where left-wing politics becomes about tearing things down and not building, is the problem. And that's what I explore in my essay in 3 parts, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, which is widely available. And many people say that I make a lot of points they weren't expecting. I go a lot of places they didn't think I would go. I talk about all kinds of things, and it really changed how they viewed not just Kamala Harris, but left-wing and socialist politics in general. So I hope people will check it out. I'm glad I put it out. The short booklet, short essay in 3 parts. You can get it. It's available.
No, that's awesome, Caleb. I really do appreciate this. And that book is Kamala Harris and Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. And of course, the other book is City Builders and Vandals, in our age, articles and essays on socialism. Definitely go and check out those books and those videos. Those books. My producer, he said he can listen to you for hours. He said Caleb can talk for 3 hours straight, and everything he says is on point, and I can sit there and listen to him the whole time. So I wanted to give you the accolades, from some of our people that work here. And honestly, man, I really do appreciate this. The one question, maybe 30 seconds. Why do you believe that, for her standpoint and the way that she operates, this is about childhood trauma? It sounds like that's the argument that you're making, that a lot of the things that she's doing is about trauma. It's not necessarily about benefit. I mean, for example, is it a better argument, or is it also fair to say that this is about political, raw political instincts or raw political ambition, where everything else is subordinate to that political ambition and her getting into some kind of political spot? I mean, is that sufficient, or that doesn't necessarily fit?
30 seconds is really not enough time to answer that. But let me just tell you that in the book, I point out that a number of people in the Hillary Clinton State Department have very, very, very similar biographies to her, and have had very, very similar experiences, and have displayed the same kind of tendencies. And that the studying of personalities and the profiling of personalities, this is something we need to understand, And I compare our 4 most recent U.S. presidents and, their personality traits and all of that. And I think
basically comes together.
That Kamala Harris developed as she did because she was selected based on certain personality traits. So that's all
Caleb, I want to really thank you for coming on. You're right, 30 seconds wasn't enough time for that. I apologize. We kind of hit it at the last moment. But this is Caleb Malton, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, articles and essays on socialism. And again, check out his new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back. I will be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, the only corner you're going to get today, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, typically Shane will say whatever he says in regards to the Independent. However, Shane is not feeling that well today. Let's send him your good get-together wishes. Let's do the news. Also, by the way, we're taking calls. 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your participation in the show makes the show what it is, so definitely feel free to call in. But let's get to the headlines. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump were in quarantine at the White House early Friday after receiving word that they had tested positive for COVID-19. The president confirmed the test results in a Twitter message shortly before 1 a.m. Eastern. Trump tweeted, "Tonight, Flotus and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine recovery process immediately." Now, as I pointed out, what does this mean about the election? Donald Trump is now in quarantine. Donald Trump was out there doing those power rallies, screaming in front of the audience as recently as yesterday, day after the debate. So what does this mean about the election? If Donald Trump gets ill, if Donald Trump gets sicker, if Donald Trump dies, what does this mean about the election? I think there are profound issues. There are profound issues. And in those things being profound issues, basically those things are going to have to be worked out. It's fascinating. It's another curveball in the sense of 2020. And yet, here we are. Now, to be clear, there are 207,000 people in the United States with COVID-19. There are over 7 million people infected with COVID-19. I'm sorry, 200,000 that died, 7 million, over 7 million that are infected. Our country has been racked by this. And there has been a disassociation between the people who were, let's say, not overtly affected, who were in a particular class where they could work remotely, where they didn't necessarily have to go into work in order to do their job, as opposed to others that either got fired from retail as it was obliterated, or as they were going to work because there were certain people disproportionately that worked at those shops that didn't close down, those stores at 7-Eleven, those hospitals. And those people were on the front lines. We call them heroes. We didn't give them any more money, but we call them heroes. I'm making the point that Trump getting infected makes sense in comparison to the country itself that was being racked by an illness to which he seemed to be in a bubble and dealing with. Boris Johnson and President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil both have tested positive. And a herd immunity is what Boris Johnson initially was talking about, what quickly changed his mind when he was infected and he was looking pretty bad, death's door, giving a video to the public. All right, I'm going to be away for a while, quarantine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm making the point that what does this do to Donald Trump after he gets infected? And does he alter his thinking on this? Or does he remain this unempathetic, uncaring person who has gone around playing down the fact that the disease, or how rabid the disease was going to be, despite knowing how bad it was months ago? The stocks dropped, terrified that the president is ill. The coronavirus, and so look, we're in a situation where we don't necessarily know, and we don't even know what this means for the election in November. If anything happens to Trump or Pence takes over, is Pence going to run in the race? And if Pence runs in the race, what does that mean in the sense of November, of whether or not the race gets accepted? And what does this even mean in the context of Biden versus Pence? 2020 is hit with a lot of curveballs. This is just a recent one. The House passed a $2.2 trillion Democratic stimulus plan on Thursday night, even as Democrats and the Trump administration struggled to strike a relief deal. The chamber approved the legislation in a 2014-207 vote. 18 Democrats voted against the measure. As lawmakers in competitive districts were worried of ongoing impasse over the aid. The bill likely would not get through the Republican-held Senate and become law. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has opposed the legislation as his caucus resists spending trillions more on the federal response to the pandemic. Understand, McConnell has basically said, I want a consensus. And you have very loud members on the Republican side, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, that want nothing to do with this. From the other side of this, though, you do have some Republicans that are concerned about going back to their districts and losing. And as such, that pressure has begun to change their mind a little bit. It's begun to make them think, hey, I don't want to go back to my district and look people in the face who are angry at me, who are desperate, who are at food banks, and who are realize that I did not vote on their behalf. In which case, many of those Republicans have become more amenable to accepting, but of course, not enough to pass the bill. A high-ranking Vatican official on Wednesday said Pope Francis would not meet with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during his visit to Rome, citing the proximity to the U.S. general election in November. Basically, the Pope is wise enough to not be used as a prop by Mike Pompeo. While he didn't meet Pope Francis, Pompeo met the Vatican officials on Thursday, including Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, Archbishop Richard Gallagher, the Holy See's foreign minister. The Vatican News Agency reported the 45-minute encounter was cordial, and both parties discussed the respective stances on China. On Sunday, a territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan reignited and is now threatening to engulf the whole region. Clashes raged between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces on Friday despite calls for a ceasefire as French President Emmanuel Macron warned Turkey against the alleged deployment of jihadists to the war zone. Macron said intelligence reports had established that 300 fighters from jihadist groups in Syria had passed through Turkey en route to Azerbaijan, saying a red line has been crossed and demanding an explanation. I honestly don't know who Emmanuel Macron thinks he is. And what is Macron going to do? Is he going to get militarily involved in this conflict? Right now, the countries of the world have been basically saying, stop what you are doing. And Azerbaijan and Armenia, basically a conflict that goes back 100, 200 years or more, peace at the barrel of a gun. And right now, the peace has been destabilized. And the two countries don't seem to be willing or ready, let's say, to destabilize it, despite the world's proclamations and wants for that to take place. Nearly 200 people have been confirmed killed, including more than 30 civilians, and there are fears of the fighting expanding into an all-out multi-front war that could suck in regional powers, Turkey and Russia. I think that needs to be considered seriously. It seems that Turkey has ideas on expansion. And in those ideas of expansion, it has lumped itself inside with Azerbaijan. Now the catch becomes what happens in the situation, and does the situation escalate, or can the forces, France and Turkey, come to some level of agreement between each other so this does not go into very bad areas? Let's just hope that at some point this resolves without escalating further. Chinese President Xi Jinping last week committed his country to carbon neutrality in 2060. This week, China took a small but tangible step in achieving its goal as the country's biggest ever solar power station is connected to the grid in northwest province of Qinghai. The solar park has a capacity of 2.2 gigawatts. That makes it the second biggest in the world, narrowly trailing behind India's 2.45 gigawatt Balda solar park. Until now, China's biggest solar station was Tianjin Desert Solar Park with a capacity of 1.4 gigawatts. For comparison, the biggest solar farm has a capacity in the United States of 579 megawatts. Yes, that is dramatically less. And last, Honda will withdraw from Formula One at the end of the 2021 season as it shifts a goal of carbon neutrality, the Japanese car manufacturer said on Friday. Honda is the engine supplier for the Red Bull and AlphaTauri teams. It has resumed competition in F1 in 2015. Red Bull Racing said it was disappointed, but noted the success of the partnership with Max Verstappen, scoring Honda's first victory since 2006 at the 2019 Austrian Grand Prix, followed by 3 other wins and 13 podium finishes. Team Principal Christian Horner said they respect Honda's decision to redeploy their resources. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So we have a caller. Let's go to our caller. But in fact, before we go into the caller, let me set the premise or set the stage in regards for some level of commentary. You know, looking at the Chinese objective of carbon neutrality in 2060, and also looking at the solar park, the 2.2 gigawatt solar park, we have all sorts of technical acumen in this world. Poverty, homelessness, hunger, choices. We, just in minor measure, if you wanted to look at something that comes across as small but overtly dramatic in regards to how we engage our youthful generation that are growing up in this country, eliminate debt from the standpoint of school loans at colleges, and have free public institutions where anybody can go to school free of charge and learn what they need to learn to the degree that they want to learn. It only makes your country better. The amount of money that we learn that people have on the sidelines where people basically don't pay their taxes, meaning the rich, the top 1% owe like 70% of the taxes or something to that effect. Hundreds of billions, like $300 billion or more of wealth that is basically held back as opposed to having that money being used for the betterment of the country itself. The rich hoards their cash, or $7 trillion off the coast of our country. I guess the point that I'm making here is if we really care about the individuals in our country, if we really want this country to excel that much further from the standpoint of each and every one of us in our individual liberty of sorts, college is one way to start that process. Elimination of healthcare is another. Think about what that means for the moment. Each and every person in this country who's working gets a pay raise. Because at the end of the day, all of us, to some degree, have to attend to our needs in regards to healthcare. And fact of the matter is, those two, by themselves, will be a dramatic shift in regards to eliminating tens of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, off of people's backs. We can do it. Just 2 items. Let's go to a caller. We have Michael from Milwaukee. Michael, welcome to the show. What's up?
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking my call. I really appreciate it. I have being from Wisconsin and it being a swing state this year, I was a strong Bernie supporter, but I was a strong Bernie supporter because of his stance on Medicare for all. And that is my single issue vote. That is why I'm calling.
Mike, same here. Same here. I am a single issue voter on that Medicare for all issue. I don't care if Satan himself is on the other side. I find it reprehensible that the party or that the political structure does not support a policy when you have, 30 million people without health care. I think it's abominable. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
It is. No, it's absolutely horrible, especially during a pandemic. But this is something that the right has come to grips with, something the right fully understands with abortion. The right wing is very much a single issue bloc, as far as I understand. And look who's in power. They have got the Senate, they've got the presidency, court judges. They're in charge in large part because they're a single issue bloc and can galvanize their supporters in such a way. I think the left has done a disservice by not latching on to Medicare for all as a single issue. And I think going forward in 2024, we need to make that a single issue for all on the left.
Basically, a tip of the spear. Thank you for the call, Michael. I appreciate it. Yeah, tip of the spear. I 1,000% agree with you. If all of those lefties that agreed with Medicare for all, the 88%, you either lose or you accept it. That's power. That's not the way we do politics. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am typically here with my co-host Shane Stranahan, but he's out getting some rest. He's not feeling that well. He came down with a fever yesterday. So I'm going to hold down the fort. We're joined by Mark Sleboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us at short notice.
Jamarl, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Absolutely. So we've been following the Nagorno-Karabakh incident, basically Armenia and basically the conflict between Armenia and it dropped from my mind at the very instance that I was about to say it. But Azerbaijan, thank you, I appreciate it. I've been saying the word all day, and all of a sudden it just drops out of my mind. But right, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, this particular territory. Now, if you look at it on the map, It is a very large space between the two countries, and you need to see it on a map in order to get kind of a framing of the way this stuff is breaking down, meaning the way the conflict and how that conflict is taking place. It doesn't seem to be an end to this. I've been listening and reading the information coming from the prime ministers of both countries. And one country says it's a war of independence, and that basically we should have freedom and determination for our stake in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, the rest of the world doesn't accept this. And because the rest of the world doesn't accept this, and because this is in somebody else's territory, well, it becomes a conflict. And it doesn't seem like a conflict has a way of changing, especially since Armenia is accepting this as if this is their territory and that they're willing to defend it from the standpoint of like a war. What is the latest update on this conflict?
Okay, so it's a good point you have about the geography of the conflict, and it's actually quite a bit more than Nagorno-Karabakh, this Armenian ethnic enclave that is within the borders of what is today Azerbaijan. It's a bit more than that, because as a result of the conflict upon the breakup of the Soviet Union, the 1988 to 1994 conflict, Armenia had the better of that conflict. And they actually drove deep into Azerbaijan territory, right? All of the territory between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, and a bit to the side of it, has been that conflict for some 26 years now by Azerbaijan. These are 7 adjacent regions of Azerbaijan that are continue to be occupied today by Armenia, and the Azerbaijani population was largely displaced from that region. Call it ethnic cleansing if you want, this is how Armenia maintains its supply of Nagorno-Karabakh. And the Russian brokered ceasefire that ended or put that conflict into a frozen conflict, which has since become unfrozen, established the line of contact, which was deep in Azerbaijan, basically past Nagorno-Karabakh, with Armenian troops occupying a good stretch of Azerbaijani territory to the west of that point, and Azerbaijan, of course, deep within their territory on the other. So one of the strategic aims of this conflict may be a bit more limited than taking back all of their territory and Nagorno-Karabakh itself, but may be focused on more focused on retrieving some of these regions where Armenia occupies Azerbaijani land, like Fuzuli and Jabrayil, to the southeast of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Now, let me ask you something. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Armenia considers those territories their land. Meaning, do they consider that Armenian territory? Which means that an attack on that is basically, from their perspective of the world, an attack on Armenia.
No, actually, they don't. They claim that Nagorno-Karabakh is independent. The new Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan has actually made comments saying that Nagorno-Karabakh is part of Armenia, although they haven't made.
That's what I'm getting at, because I've been reading the comments between the two prime ministers. Yeah, you're right. That's what I was going by. I mean, that's what I was asking, because I was reading the commentary between the two prime ministers as they were in debates over this. What is the basic argument for Azerbaijan and Armenia for this?
Yeah, the two prime ministers actually appeared on a Russian TV political show, kind of the equivalent of 60 Minutes, even called that, in Russia. And they both defended their position, showing that for both countries, Russia's influence and balancing act between the two of them is still the primary forum that they are carrying out their diplomacy with each other over Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding region. Right now, the conflict is expanding somewhat because evidently, first of all, the Nagorno-Karabakh erstwhile capital, Stepanakert, is coming under heavy artillery fire, which is, of course, rather random and has the potential of causing a lot of civilian damage besides infrastructure damage. But also, at least 4 Israeli-made Azerbaijani drones have been shot down deep in Armenia, near the Armenian capital of Yerevan. So that seems to be that Azerbaijan is attempting to expand and bring the conflict home to Armenia in a way that up till now the fighting has been restricted into what is technically or under international law Azerbaijani territory. And they are the Azerbaijani forces are also heavily targeting the narrow mountainous highway that connects Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh, the Nagorno-Karabakh capital, Stepanakert. And that's kind of the lifeline, the jugular vein to Nagorno-Karabakh, because it's necessary to get supplies, be that military, food, medicine, back and forth between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, because it is such a heavily mountainous area. There's not a lot of, regular access to it.
But what unfroze this? I mean, is it, well, let me say it this way. From a political standpoint, if it's a piece at the barrel of a gun, then the moment that there is an inequity between the two forces, meaning the moment that I have the capability to expand into this and you can't stop me, or at the very least I don't think you can stop me, because it's a piece at the barrel of a gun, well, this is no longer peace. Or Was there something that actually took place? Meaning, was this an issue of politics where one side wanted to regain territory that they lost? Or was it something that actually unfroze this peace of sorts in order to tumble us into where we are? And this kind of gets to, again, the argument that the Prime Minister of Armenia is making versus the Prime Minister of Azerbaijan. What are the two competing arguments that they're making, and what was the thing that unfroze this conflict?
Yeah, I think it's actually a bit of both, because as I said earlier, the outcome of the conflict, the line of conflict that was established in 1994 after that large conflict between the two countries over Nagorno-Karabakh ended heavily in Armenia's favor, with Armenia occupying, not just Nagorno-Karabakh, but 7 regions of Azerbaijan in the southeast. Obviously, Azerbaijan has long regarded that as an injustice, all right? And under international law, a technical reading of it, not considering the self-determination of Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan, it's hard to fault them. They want their country back. What the UN recognizes as their territory. And they have long simmered about that injustice. And one of the unfreezing factors was definitely the change in economic and military power since 1994, in the last 3 decades. There has been, from Azerbaijan's perspective, all of the dialogue of the Minsk group that was created to solve the conflict. All of this has resulted in nothing. All the talk has not helped get their country back. And the economic benefits of their oil and gas resources have vastly expanded their military budget. In the last few years, the military budget of Azerbaijan is bigger than the national budget of Armenia, and they've spent it on a lot of weapons. Russia sells weapons to both sides, but Azerbaijan has also been getting weapons from Israel and Turkey. And that brings up the other unfreezing factor, which is Turkey. Turkey is injecting itself into this conflict in a big way, full-throatedly in support of Azerbaijan, whereas everyone else is trying to stay even-handed, including Russia, a balancing act, and say simply, let's end the hostilities without taking sides. Turkey is completely backing Azerbaijan. They're certainly backing them with intelligence, with supplies. Even the French president has now made statements that seem to be confirming that Turkey has transported militants from the conflict in Syria, their Islamist and jihadi proxy forces in Syria, and transported from several hundred to several thousand of them to the conflict in Azerbaijan to fight on Azerbaijan's side. This is, of course, despite the fact that the militants are almost certainly Sunni radicals, while Azerbaijan is a Shia state. But sometimes money, and evidently they're being paid up to $2,000 a month, big money for them is the deciding factor in that. Obviously, Erdogan has a very expansionist, neo-Ottoman foreign policy. He's looking to expand his influence from all the way from Libya in the far west, where he's also involved in a conflict with Russia there, Syria to the south, where he's involved with a geopolitical conflict with Russia there, and now to the east to Azerbaijan, which is a Turkic country. He's looking to expand Turkey's influence there at the expense of Russia, again, in another kind of proxy conflict with Russia there. And he's really hoping to increase Turkey's regional influence there in a bid to make Turkey a great power.
That's astonishing. I mean, this is a tinderbox, to put it mildly, and this could go horribly awry. I mean, considering Turkey is a NATO nation and NATO is aligned against Russia, this is a tinderbox, and it seems like the Western press.
Armenia is. And not only is Turkey a NATO nation, but Armenia is a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization,
that means Russia
a NATO analog headed by Russia.
Yeah, this is a tinderbox, and Western nations are not necessarily paying attention to this, even though they're browbeating these two to try to get involved. And I think the issue is, regardless of what these nations are saying, there's a power inequity that I think might have just taken place that has compelled the actions. Mark, thank you very much for coming in and giving us a larger explanation of the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. I really do appreciate it. You guys are listening. Oh, Mark, international relations and security analyst, Mark Sloboda. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. We are coming to you with a great guest, Nico House. Nico, what's going on? Political activist and broadcast journalist, founder and CEO of MCSC Network. Nico, how's it going, man?
What's going on, guys? Appreciate you having me on. It's going how it's going.
It's going how it's going. Now, where are you? You're in Florida, right?
Miami, up.
Oh, okay. What is it? What's going on down there from the standpoint of COVID? I'm just, every time we call in, we just check up because Florida was one of those states where it was hit pretty hard.
Florida did open back up. Now, people out here do still practice social distancing and wearing masks, but the businesses have gone back to normal. The general sense that I've gotten on the ground from people I've talked to, small business owners and things of that nature, that they're relieved that they can open back up at full capacity. However, it's not because they want to. It's just merely because the government hasn't provided any, financial stability for them in the short term to make sure their employees are taken care of. And so they're like, well, if you're going to not give us anything to hold us over, then at least let us for ourselves. And so in my opinion, it's kind of sad that we're in this position, because I remember during the debate that topic came up. He's like, oh, man, Trump wants to open everything. And it's like, yeah, but the Democrats had an opportunity to give us money and didn't do so. And so what other choice do we have? So basically their option was to starve us to death until we voted for Joe Biden, which I'm not also not a fan of.
Well, to be fair, yes, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. But to be fair, that was Trump's policy too. I mean, Trump and Republicans wanted to get people back to work. And what they understood was if we give people a stipend every month or X amount of time, the incentive for those people to try to throw themselves back into their jobs where they could be riddled with COVID-19 goes down. And you're right, it's a grim choice. If you're a business owner, if you're a worker, and they've shut down your store and you're not getting money, your first thought is, okay, where's my cash? What am I going to do? And so if that store opens, even if there's a potential for COVID-19, you are forced and compelled by your own needs to get back to work. That's a horrible choice to make. It really is.
Yep. I agree.
Let me ask you
this. And at the end of the day, like me as I work for myself now, but when I used to be a server at a restaurant back in college, I would have to put myself in that danger because I have to pay my bills. So I completely understand that people who are just like, look, I got to get back to work. If y'all not going to take care of me, then I got to take care of myself.
Yeah, it's not choice at that point. I mean, you could say it's choice, but the other option is to basically die,
right, in one way or another.
Let me ask you this, or starve to death or something like that. The debate. Now, you, similar to me, are not a Democrat. You're kind of outside the political space. You float out above it all in a sense. I had my certain feelings about the debate. I thought Trump won it, even though I thought it was a hollow win, because I thought he accomplish what I think he wanted to, meaning get Joe Biden to repudiate his base while him backing his own base. And he got Joe Biden to basically punch the left over and over and over again in a debate while he stuck to his guns, even to the point of white supremacy. He wouldn't do it. That's how wed he was basically to his base, police, military, etc. What did you think about the debate? How did you see it? Did you think there was a win, if there was a win at all? Did you think it was just like, no, this was horrible, this wasn't even a debate? What was your thought?
That debate was crazy. The debate was crazy, first of all. But I actually agree with you. And I found it funny because like the people who were already voting for Joe Biden were like, oh man, we felt like Joe Biden won. But no one that I knew that wasn't voting for Joe Biden felt like he won. They felt he got dragged through the dirt and that he kind of tried to come and fight on Trump's terms. And Trump really, to them, kind of took control of the debate. Like to the Trump supporters, they were pleased at the fact that he like gave Chris Wallace the finger and told him to shut up and let him finish talking. Like they liked the fact that he could.
He was being an alpha male. He was being dominant. And so for Trump's in his head, when he says dominate the streets, well, his framing of this stuff is kind of the same way. Look at what he did to Ted Cruz. Look at what he did to Marco Rubio, calling him a little boy. And all of this.
And everybody thought that was a negative, remember? Everybody thought that was a negative last time. And it helped him.
Yes, it did. Call him, you're a little boy. And Ted Cruz, the funniest thing about Ted Cruz recently was the Chris Cuomo clip. I don't know if you've seen this. Ted Cruz goes on to Chris Cuomo. They get into a fight on air. Chris Cuomo eventually says, hey, why don't you ask Trump? What are you doing, scared? He called your wife ugly. Now, this is the funniest thing on the world.
What?
Because if you remember what happened to Ted Cruz was bent to form. Do you remember this? Ted Cruz, they called his wife ugly.
Yeah, I remember it.
Says his dad helped kill Kennedy. Like they went after him. Ted Cruz, they said, are you going to back Trump? He called your wife ugly. Are you going to back Trump? Ted Cruz was like, I'm going to beat him. And then you see the video with Ted Cruz sitting at the phone bank under Trump and Pence, phone banking for Trump. Saddest thing in the world.
Oh, yeah. Hey, it's funny when I thought about that. I was like, man, Ted Cruz is a good little Democrat. He would be a good little Democrat. Because, Democrats, that's what Democrats, we've, grown accustomed to seeing them do. Not as much Republicans, but now, look, here we are. Trump has them in check like that. I think the part of the debate that kind of like made me jump out of my chair was whenever Joe Biden inevitably pulled the, but do you know my son Bo? My son Bo isn't weak. My son Bo, da-da-da. And when he said, I don't know Bo, but I do know Hunter. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God. because that was a moment in the debate that I thought like, man, Trump can't really weasel his way out of this one. And he still did it.
Yeah.
He did it. He took
really didn't talk about
like the emotional reaction that Trump. Yeah, he did. He was like, no, I don't have to. He's like, why? Why would we could talk about Hunter? He's still alive. Like,
the Hunter thing was so.
And I think that Joe Biden's response to that was actually pretty sickening to me. When he was like, oh, my son just had a drug problem, like most people in this country do nowadays, or many people in this country do. And I thought to myself, that's crazy because when all the people that look like me had drug problems, you thought to put them in jail for 25 in life. But when your son has a drug problem, he gets a job in Burisma for $50,000 a month.
That's right. And Trump, by the way, he did try to bring it up like that. If you remember, like, he was using his son as a prop. He uses it all the time. My son, Bo. Yeah. And then he would use it in a way that's weird because he was trying to connect it to the war. As if he died in the war, but he didn't die in the war. And so it's like, if your son has a medical issue and it digs into you deeply, you would think the most natural thing in the world would be, I want to make sure everybody's covered. And that's not where he goes with this, despite using his kid as a prop. And Trump effectively dodged that. Yeah, I don't have anything to say about your son. I have something to say about Hunter. And interestingly enough, at one point he did bring up the criminal thing. When Trump, I think Joe Biden made some reference to, you hurting African Americans or something. And Trump made reference to, hey, you were locking up darkies.
He said y'all called him super proud. He said you called them super predators. He said, I'm the one who introduced the First Step Act. What have you done? That's and it's like, whenever people were like, well, what did he do? I'm like, bro, I have no answer to that. He introduced the crime bill and then wouldn't apologize for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, we got to remember all the things that these people are getting away with, that Trump and his administration are getting away with, the things that these police officers are getting away with. Joe Biden, I mean, which do you want to talk about foreign policy with the Patriot Act and even domestic policy, or do you want to talk about the police state with the crime bill? That was all Biden stuff, and the only thing that Trump is taking advantage of is what Biden set up for him.
Exactly. I keep, when I make the point to people and say, you realize that the mean-spiritedness that was put into our criminal justice system when it prosecutes, when it goes after people, the 1,000, dead or killed that take place like every year, and I'm talking about on average, with 1% being prosecuted. Joe Biden was the person to put that in. And yet, and it aggravates me to no end, he would say, I was part of the civil rights movement, helping getting you guys unsegregated.
Oh my God.
Say it in a heartbeat. Look at one blackface after the next and say it. He would also make this argument that, basically, I, Joe Biden, king of blacks, have been helping you. And he would go and use Jacob Blake as a prop. He would use George Floyd as a prop, despite the fact that in many respects, he is more culpable than pretty much anybody else in our political system today for those crime bills.
Let me tell you something that bothered me to no end. I mean, to this day, I lost sleep over it. And I didn't realize how much it was going to affect me until the end of the debate. But that morning, a New York Times story broke saying the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron in Kentucky, lied, saying that the jury reached a consensus with the prosecution that those two police officers should not have been prosecuted for killing Brianna Taylor. He lied because a juror came out anonymously and got permission to by the Attorney General's office, and he said, we never had the option to prosecute Brianna Taylor.
Yeah.
Those cops. We never had the option. And he lied to the entire world saying, yeah, we all agreed that those cops were justified in their actions.
Yeah, he came out with that.
This is a New York Times story. Everybody got this update. How do you not talk about that during the debate?
That's a big deal. I mean, because I remember that. The juror recently came out, if I'm not mistaken, saying they wanted the entirety of the grand jury thing out and open. And it looked like the prosecutor was trying to hold it for a bit. Because the last I saw about it, it was being held, meaning like he was trying to hold up the release of that document. And so if they've released it, and it came across as if he basically lied, that is horrendous. I mean, think about that for the moment. You're right. How does that not come up in the debate?
He lied. The attorney for the juror said that he was he was flustered and frustrated because to the degree that AG Cameron lied, he just was like, I can't believe this. That was because you got to think about it. They attached 3 felony charges to the dude who shot a wall.
Who missed?
Imagine what they would have done to Brianna Taylor's killer.
Who missed? Think about that.
Who missed?
The weirdness of that. If that's legal, then there's something fundamentally wrong with your justice system. Meaning, you have 3 cops that, or not how many ever have, burst into a room at night in America with the Second Amendment and with people screaming to me, stand your ground anytime that a black person gets murdered. Now, the wild part about this is, like you said, the bullets missed. He gets charged. The people who hit her go free. Isn't that bizarre as a criminal justice system? Let's do this, Nico. I'm going to take a break. Wait, let's do this. I'm going to take a break. And we're going to come back and we're going to finish out the show. I've been enjoying this. I've enjoyed all the segments today, but this one in particular, I think, I don't know. You're right. Those things should have been discussed in the debate, and they weren't. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are with Nico House, political activist and broadcast journalist, founder and CEO of MCSC Network. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am typically here with Shane Stranahan, but Shane is not feeling all that well today, so definitely send him your good wishes. We are joined by a political activist and broadcast journalist, founder and CEO of MCSC Network, Nico House. We were talking basically about what wasn't included in the Democratic primary, at the Democratic debate, at the debate between the two, the presidential debate. I think the thing that bothered me most, if I'm being honest, is how detached and utterly theatrical that debate was in context of what is happening in the country. It just seems that our government is utterly detached from the real material concerns of the public.
Yeah.
Why? Now, this is a question that you can go any way you want. I have my own ideas about this and people who I blame. I honestly, believe it or not, tend to blame the left. But why do you think that it's become that disconnected?
Blame the left. No, I absolutely blame the left. I mean, I'm furious at the left, and I feel like it like festered more so after that debate, because after I'm like, so hold up. He literally looks at y'all straight. I'm not going to pass the Green New Deal. Then he takes a dig at Sanders and says, I'm not doing anything Sanders wants. I don't care if they're the most popular policies in the country. Right? And then they get on this tangent, the USPS, voter suppression. So now y'all care about voter suppression, but you didn't care about it in the primaries when it was proven. You didn't, and you didn't care about it, nor did you deny whenever that attorney said during the DNC fraud lawsuit, no, we could just nominate who we want to. We don't really care who y'all vote for.
We can be in a smoke-filled back room and pick a candidate, and you can't do squat about it.
Yep. And you can't do anything about it. I'm listening to them talk, and I'm listening to the leftists. They say, oh man, bro, on Twitter, somebody said, oh wow, Joe Biden said Antifa is an idea, not a group. I think he's really trying to win me over. I said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? What?
It's like, dude, just give me healthcare.
Don't prosecute the fascist cops.
Yeah.
Don't apologize for the 94 crime bill. Don't promise to repeal the 94 crime bill. Don't promise to ban private prisons. Don't promise to decriminalize drugs. Don't promise to decriminalize marijuana.
Right there.
Antifa is an idea.
That's the thing, Nico. That's the thing. If the left accepts that, meaning if you are at the point where you don't care one iota what that candidate wants, and you accept the premise that it is not the candidate's job to get your vote, which is the most natural thing in the world from the standpoint of a representative government. That guy's trying to get my vote. He's trying to win, right? It's voting. You would think that the person will go out there, but instead, cowardice. And cowardice is enough to cow the left.
What do we get? What could we possibly get from Biden? If anything, you know how I feel about it. We're gonna lose more under Biden because nobody's gonna try to fight him.
Yeah. I mean, but that's my point. If we would have started off the moment that Sanders lost or something like that, instead of having the frame of mind of, okay, well, at this point, I guess you have to go for Biden, but instead stuck with the policy. 88% of us back this, meaning from people in the Democratic Party. It is unconscionable that you don't back this. And if indeed Donald Trump is going to end the world, the apocalypse, I mean, he is, if he wins, going to get the House, Senate, Supreme Court. He's going to win it all. So maybe you're right. But if you're willing to tank it to that man, instead of appropriating policies or organically bring the party together, then the issue is with the party itself. And that should have been the argument. That argument is rational. It makes sense. And yet that is the opposite. It's the opposite of what lefties do.
Yeah. It doesn't make it. It's almost, I don't want to say like lefties are lazy, but I do believe that there is this contingency of the left who thinks they're more intelligent than they actually are. But then when it's time to actually get on behind closed doors and begin to strategize, like outside, like you can do an outside in type of strategy, right? Where like that's what Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and a lot of these great activists did. Martin Luther King didn't like JFK or Nixon. RFK had to literally drag MLK, kicking and screaming like, "Hey, my brother really wants to try to make some change." And MLK was like, I guess we'll slow down with it.
And by the way, that could have been with Nixon too. There are stories about that where Nixon could have been that person to end up talking to Martin Luther King instead of Kennedy. All this stuff is fascinating.
It could have been either one. Why? Because the mandate that those activists got was so large because it was formed outside of political parties that either president, even Lyndon B. Johnson, was forced to acquiesce to that mandate rather than to a party. And then when they saw how successful that was, they said, we can never have this again. So let's say BLM is a Democrat thing. Let's say Antifa is a Democrat thing. Let's say crime is fighting the justice system is a Democrat thing. And then the left fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. It's crazy. I'm like, it's obvious. Like, bro, when they tell you had some of the most brilliant candidates the Democratic Party has really ever had to run, and y'all say, yeah, I know, I understand that, and I understand what the issues that are prominent today, including racial and social justice, equity for all, for possible. But how about this? Can we put the man in, nominate the man who literally caused all these problems, and y'all would still vote for him? And the left just said yes.
Left accepts it.
So what do we have?
How bizarre is that?
What do we have now?
Basically, it's not your job to get our vote. It's our job to cater and throw out bodies at you. And you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's not a democracy or representative government. That's something else. And they say, hey, we don't have a choice. They would say, we don't have a choice. They would appropriate the language of the people who are exploiting them. And I think that's the saddest aspect of it all.
And you know what's even more bizarre? I see more quote-unquote leftists more angry at Tulsi Gabbard for fighting for election integrity.
Oh, yeah.
Than they are at Joe Biden.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
I'm like, hold up. Are y'all mad at her for what? Because I was confused. I was off Twitter for a couple of days, and they were like, she quoted a video from Project Veritas. I'm like, okay, but what was it saying? That there's ballot harvesting. I'm like, well, were they lying about the ballot harvesting in the video? They were like, well, no, there seems to be some kind of ballot. I'm like, well, okay, so what's the problem? I'm confused. Did she accuse Elon of something? No, but Veritas did. I'm like, yeah, but Veritas does what Veritas does. Did the video show ballot harvesting? We're like, well, yeah. I'm like, so did y'all talk about her bill? Well, no, because she was propping up Project Veritas. I'm like, hold up. No. She introduced that bill 2 weeks ago. Y'all know that. It had nothing to do with Project Veritas. She's been fighting for election integrity for years. Y'all have literally had zero to say about any of her election integrity efforts. Because that's one of the reasons. That's why I say this is why Bernie lost. Because if y'all put the onus on him to support the legislation that Tulsi was trying to get passed to make sure the system was fixed by the time we got to this point, then we wouldn't have to deal with this stuff.
And by
now,
the way, put it in context. I mean, basically. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was
no, go ahead.
Basically, the Democratic Party screamed that a foreign government undermined our election. Tulsi Gabbard said, okay, then let's have election transparency. And everybody else said, yeah. Now, for all of the flack and the talk that has been going on for elections, being, there's something on this game out elections, etc. Tulsi Gabbard's bill got to the root and the nub of let's deal with election integrity. Like, if you don't know, and if your public doesn't fully believe that your elections are transparent and safe, then you're going to run into problems with that public disbelieving the integrity of your elections, or for that matter, the legitimacy of a candidate. She was right.
Yeah. And she's been consistent about this on the left and the right. Like, she's called out all the states, all the examples, and she's talked about how complacent both parties have been. And because this particular situation, they believe favors the right. But I'm like, that's not the case. Actually, ballot harvesting has hurt the Democrats and Republicans. Y'all are morons. Like, I don't know what else to tell you because y'all didn't care. You literally didn't care. And even in the context of this discussion, Jamarl, they still didn't mention her bill, which is what the whole conversation is really about. That's why she's even included in it, because she had just introduced the bill a couple of weeks ago. And they're like, yeah, Tulsi's going full right. I'm like, y'all are this fetishization of attacking Tulsi is becoming weird, like a different type of weird. Like
Why do you think they do that?
Biden attacked.
Why do you think they do that? Well, because during the primaries, they attacked her as if, I don't know, she slapped her mom or something. It became like a religious thing. They would attack. I mean, they would be belligerent towards her. And you'd be like, what's your issue? Do you remember Joe Rogan? That crazy woman that was supposed to be a journalist for the New York Times goes on Joe Rogan. And she...
Very wise. Yeah.
Right. And she trashes Tulsi. Now, Joe Rogan asked the most simple question in the world. What do you mean by that? And she had no clue. Because if she was around her other toadies,
Well, that's what everybody else said.
Exactly.
So, like,
it's what everybody else
right?
talks
Like,
about.
it's
So
like,
all of the people who are around her would have just
you know
agreed.
what it comes down to? What it comes down to is they don't like Tulsi because she is principled, right? And so, us in the independent journalism community, we get this to a obviously far lesser degree. When we're independent, the left they've developed, or shown a lack of development in their understanding of like the left-right paradigm. And they show that when they attack us as being right-wing or helping Trump, because they don't have any idea what to say or what to do or how to respond. So they don't like Tulsi because she had that same independent mindset. And then once again, it comes down to she exposes their lack of concern for changing the system. And they know that. So whenever that happens, they have to say, well, you must want Trump to win. You're trying to get a job at Fox News. But Joe Biden literally attacks Bernie Sanders, attacks the Green New Deal, makes a mockery of the left on that debate stage. Bernie comes out and defends him. And they're like, oh, Bernie shows such poise.
And that's what
He's
I mean.
so brave.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Leverage. Politics is leverage, and cowardice commands none. And you have this situation where they are so terrified of Trump that Joe Biden can come out and basically say, I'm going to slap AOC. AOC will still vote for him. He could pee in, other people's corn syrup or whatever. They would still vote for him and they would still advocate for him. And I think it's like when you get to that point, that's not an election anymore. I agree with you, man. I totally agree with you on the Tulsi thing. I would say this, though. She's an odd duck in the way that her politics floats between the two.
Absolutely.
And it throws people off. And so when people engage me, for example.
Tulsi is not good at reading the room, right?
Right.
She's not. That's
right.
her weakest.
Right.
That's her weak. No, it's like it's weird. I think it's a Hawaiian thing because like the culture is so different there, and everybody is just so straightforward. And that's how she is. If she feels like something, she's not gonna maybe I shouldn't talk about Project Veritas if I want to convey this point. But her mind is, well, if this helps to get my legislation talked about, then I'm going to talk about it. I don't understand why I wouldn't.
Right.
The video isn't false. And I'm like, I understand, because some people were like, well, why would she use that timing, right? And I'm like, I get it, but at the same time, like, why would we react to that? Is the video showing false evidence? No. Like every now and then, I gotta quote Fox News because they're the ones who broke the damn story.
Right. Yeah.
I don't like it.
What matters more so is it true?
It's the right thing to do.
Than anything else. Project Veritas is sketchy, but if it's true, that's something else.
They are.
I mean,
But
I do agree with you on this point. Right? Well, I do agree with you on this point. If I make an argument about something that hurts Biden, I'm being honest. That's not a Trump position. You know what I mean? That's a position of holding a candidate accountable. That's the difference in those things. And it's easy and it's shorthand to say, oh, you're backing Trump because of you don't back Biden. And it's like, that's an insane, short-sighted, and political, to be honest, position to take.
But what people are saying every time they say that is, please don't expose me. Stop exposing me. Stop exposing my ladies. Yeah. Stop exposing my lack of principle.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. Stop exposing my lack of principle. I always say Sanders standing beside Joe Biden makes him look bad just by standing there. He doesn't even have to say anything.
Just by standing there.
Just by standing there. Because if this guy is a Democrat, what the hell are you? Meaning if this guy's policies are the ones that people accept and like, what are you? Why are you here? So, Nico, thank you, man. I really appreciate you coming on. We have political activist and broadcast journalist, founder of CEOMCSC Network. Nico, where can people find your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at Nico, NIKOCSFB. You can also find me on my website, independent.io/MCSE Network.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. So let's do this. We are going to end this. And this has been a very interesting show, to put it mildly. We carried it. Shane, I really do hope he feels better. He's not feeling all that well. He came down with the flu or something. But this is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We made it through. This is the end of the week. We're going to leave it right here. Shout out, engineers. Shout out, Raheem. Shout out to Cam. all of them help greatly and tremendously in making the show work. And also, I want to send a shout out to the audience themselves for thanking you for the engagement and thanking you for following this broadcast. My name is Jamarl Thomas, and we will see you on Monday. Please stay safer than the President of the United States. Thanks all. Guys, we made it. Carried the show solo. Interesting experience. When I carry the show solo, believe it or not, even when I did Political Misfits, it focuses the mind. It's like when there's somebody else with you, there's a back and forth. And you get moments to rest in between. It doesn't sound like much, but like a few seconds actually matter, especially if you're looking at different stories and stuff like that. When you're not doing that, it's just on pace. The difficult part of it, believe it or not, is not the show. The difficult part is the setup. Last night, I think I couldn't sleep last night, and I ended up just kind of spending all night figuring out what I want to talk about in each segment, because you don't realize it, but a lot of back and forth in the segments of fault lines. And so you have to come up with something to be able to talk about during those times. And yesterday, just so happened, there were a ton of news stories that allowed an easy transition into this particular show. One last thing. The topic of Azerbaijan and Armenia is a big deal. Now, this was something that I didn't know a huge amount about until I started really digging into it. I get fascinated by issues of war and politics, especially the politics surrounding those wars. Fascinated a little too much about it, actually, when I'm looking at my understanding of history is framed around the wars that people have fought. This one, the position of Russia in this is fascinating to me. Honestly, it just is. I would imagine there are a lot of worries right now in regards to the Kremlin. They don't want these two countries to devolve into something that would drag them in it. And with the security agreement with Russia and Armenia, it makes it a little bit weird because Russia is basically a neutral party in both. Even though, technically, if Armenia is attacked, meaning on their soil, Russia would have to be involved. Turkey, of course, is one of the largest militaries in NATO. And even though there's technicalities associated with NATO being invoked and all this other stuff, do you really want to challenge that? Do you really want to take that risk? And beyond taking that risk, do you really want a war based on, again, allegiances to rip through that area again? If you think back to the First World War, you had an Austrian-Hungarian Empire that wanted to teach Serbia a lesson. They wanted to basically keep them contained. Their thought, Tunisian Gap, is basically, if we don't deal with them now, they will be an issue for us later. So we might as well come up with a pretext to deal with them now. And in coming up with the pretext, when Archduke Ferdinand was shot, this was not a big deal around the world when it happened, believe it or not. The world, But because of the political interests of Serbia, I can't pronounce his name. It's Hoffendorf, I believe. One of those generals that was kind of like a John McCain of sorts that wanted to attack everything. But in this particular case, he wanted to attack. And whereas Ferdinand, whatever they thought of him, was against military operations in that way. Once he was dead, it was fair game. And in this case, they were going to teach Serbia a lesson by basically giving Serbia what they needed to make this go away. But giving them things that no way they could acquiesce to because it would undermine the sovereignty of their nation. Hence, conflict. In their heads, or Austro-Hungarian heads, regional. Nobody else is getting involved. We're going to take Serbia down a notch, and we're going to enjoy taking them down a notch. Now, this is a logic that we've also had employed in the United States. I mean, when we were thinking of the Soviet Union and the missile gap, we have a higher propensity, meaning JFK knew the missile gap was nonsense. If anything, the missile gap was with the United States having better missiles, more accurate missiles, and more of a propensity to use them, in the sense that we could have far more destruction than they could do to us. So you have people in our country who wanted to, let's do this. We're going to win this. We might as well do it now while we have an advantage. I mean, these are the thoughts and stuff that goes through heads of these people, as opposed to trying to just make a decent country where you can live a decent life. It becomes a gamesmanship. It's a competition of sorts. And unfortunately, this is where we are. Gas line apparently is going through the country, but more importantly, human beings are there. Armenia at one point had a military advantage, and they utilized it in order to take territory, including Nagorno-Karabakh. If you are part of Azerbaijan, and it is part of your culture of sorts to know that this happened, and for you to want your territory back, and beyond the point of wanting your territory back, the moment that you get militarily accomplished, seeing that there was no peace in that sense, that the peace was entirely at the barrel of a gun, what if you get bigger guns? Why do you have to keep peace if you have bigger guns? When you get a belligerent ally, Turkey, that in odd, gross sense was responsible for the Holocaust, the first genocide of the Armenians. They don't accept that, but they were, historically. So Armenia looks at this and thinks, we're under threat, and declares that the land in Nagorno-Karabakh is theirs, despite the fact that the international community doesn't see it that way. So how do you resolve this? And that's kind of the issue. And from the standpoint of Russia, Russia's like, look, I don't want to, I want you guys to not do this. But it doesn't look like they're paying attention to that. It doesn't look like they're paying attention to that. What I'm hoping to do is get somebody from Armenia and from Azerbaijan. I listened to the interviews between the two prime ministers and, of course, the ancillary information that's coming out from the different channels around the world to try to get a perspective on it. But in real terms, there's a lot of people that are going to get injured. And the politics of this, it can spin out of control. Mark my words. I mean, why wouldn't it spin out of control? Think about the situation to which they find themselves. This side has a military advantage working along with Turkey. And it is true that Russia may get involved if they're attacked. But that has nothing to do with Turkey and Azerbaijan working together in order to take territory that's not necessarily in Armenia, that is in Azerbaijan, in a way of their framing, we're taking our territory back. By any means, that will be a bloody process, especially if Armenia doesn't give it up or it considers these areas to be part of their homeland. None of this is good. All of this can go into bad ends. And by the way, it can go into bad ends not because both sides want to fight. I've said this on more than one occasion. Regardless of what one side wants to do, one side can be constrained and be moved by an environment. That environment could be another individual that's engaging them or another group or another country that's engaging them that's belligerent. If you're being belligerent towards me, what are my actions? What are my potential things that I can do? I can walk away? No, not really. It's a country. You can't go nowhere. Can I run it? Can't even do that. Can I give it all up? Well, no, you're going to lose your leadership position because what people demand in positions of power is for those people to be powerful. You need to be able to defend your country and your homeland. And if you're going to give it up, you will lose that support. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is just because you might be somewhat kumbaya doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else is. And the fact that they are not forces you to be something else. I've had conversations with people who are from China, for example, and they would say, look, we don't need to be rulers. We just want to be able to, trade and this other stuff. We're not trying to have this kind of military dominance in the way the U.S. has it. The U.S. looks at that and said, if you're going to even expand, if you're going to economically, that brings a certain degree of force militarily. That will challenge our authority, even if it's in your landmass or in your area. So whether China wants to be kumbaya or not, China has to develop a military. China has to put weapons in space. China has to do these things because it needs to protect itself from what it understands as a belligerent nation. So regardless of what it wants in regards to its priorities are somehow constrained and in some way dictated by understanding that the other country, the U.S., is looking for any kind of military, economic, or propaganda assault and attack to undermine the country. You have to deal with that. You can't ignore that, especially if you're a country that has accepted it is your philosophical right to grow and expand as China has. Look, these countries can be in a certain degree of brinksmanship and everything else, And Turkey right now is utterly and entirely belligerent and has been terrifying its neighbors in regards to its expansion ambitions. And look, wherever that goes, wherever he's willing to push that, at some point, something pushes back. The world news doesn't seem to entirely be paying attention to this, even though the world leaders are. And they're giving all sorts of comments about stop, stop, stop. What are you guys doing? Stop, stop. But unfortunately, the reality of it is this is not about world leaders. Outside of maybe Russia, they don't apply in context of the situation to which these two countries find themselves. And the catch becomes, is there a resolution to stop this from being just at the barrel of a gun? And look, what you need to also understand is that war brings about diplomacy. Like, war in and of itself can be used as a tool of diplomacy. You and I are having a disagreement. I hit you in the face. Well, that's war. That's me escalating that disagreement. Meaning, the disagreement can escalate. Hopefully, however, there could be some chance. And maybe what ends up, the logic of it, is that because Azerbaijan seems to have a military advantage in this. This gets dark all the way around. Look, let me just say this. Countries lie. And during military situations, countries lie flagrantly. It doesn't really matter to the country. There's no such thing as morality, ethics, and all those things, except from a higher level. Those things are things that we as human beings in conception come up with. And as such, they're flexible. Sometimes they change. Sometimes they're disconnected from the real objective world. All those things can be potentially true. The reason why I say that is because when countries are engaged in some kind of war or military action, it is the highest priority. You can't lose. If you do lose, you lose all sorts of agency, you lose all sorts of territory, etc., 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 depending upon the type of war. Most wars aren't total wars. Most wars end up in some level of negotiation when the two sides stop or get tired of fighting. If one side has an advantage, they tend to press that advantage up until the point where it's no longer something that is beneficial to them in the sense of man, materials, and what they want to expend for that particular fight. But the moment that you get an advantage, and the moment you have a country that is angry that something has been ripped away from them, and it has the material it needs to fight it, it has the gumption it needs to fight it, and it has a powerful ally that's backing it to the hill. We're no longer equals. And as such, we're not going to continue to pretend as such. And they make a provision to go through. Now, the catch becomes, what was the instigating factor? Was the instigating factor the fact that the material concerns changed, meaning we have more of a chance to win this? Or was it something that happened on the ground between the two that initiated it? Again, countries lie. So it's kind of hard to really get a full, clear determination of it. But at the end of the day, maybe that doesn't even matter all that much. Whether it was inspired just because we have now a material advantage that we want to press in order to get our land back. There's no point in us waiting for this. Or whether it was something that happened that we were going to press that material advantage anyway. Meaning we were looking for an opportunity to do it. Or whether they just did it. It's almost secondary to the fact that people are being killed. And, it's unclear what the resolution to this. When countries get desperate, they do things in order to try to, again, defend themselves. So, my biggest fear, if I'm being bluntly honest, and, this is my own perspective, this has nothing to do with the channel, but my biggest fear is that Armenia knows it's outmatched. In the beginning, Armenia had the military advantage, but that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case right now. As such, it wouldn't be shocking to me if there were something to try to pull Russia into the conflict in a way of trying to push back on what they consider to be a larger military force. Look, war has false flags. War has all sorts of things that are built into those wars. I mean, for God's sake, even Star Trek, with the best of human beings, Cisco was willing to basically kill a Romulan senator and blame it on the Jem'Hadar in order to get the Romulans into the war. And so, we have to see how this plays out. And hopefully my cynicism in this, and the things that I might do if I was in office and I was dealing with a raw conflict that I needed to somehow win, at that point, winning matters more than anything else. And so just be aware, watch the story, and let's just hope that this story settles into something that is not expands into the larger countries at war. That would be a worst case scenario, which is why I continue for the channel to cover the story. So I'll leave it here. Like, share, and subscribe. And I want to thank all of you for joining us at Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I think it went well today. It's not the easiest thing to pull off when you're doing a show entirely by yourself. There's all sorts of things that you're trying to do all at once, and you need to be ahead of it instead of coming in and needing to catch up with it. All things being equal, my producers kept me intact. I wish there were more calls, so please call more. Please call more. Yeah, right. I die. Progressive girl. There's a small village territory between Armenia and its neighbor, Azerbaijan, and both are fighting over the land. Yes. If you look at the territory, it seems that Nagorno-Karabakh is in the mountains. So it's like a mountain territory. And apparently, if you look at between the two, it's like the space between the two that they consider to be Azerbaijan. And Armenia basically doesn't. They consider it theirs. And at this point, Azerbaijan is taking it back. Or at the very least, that's what it looks like. If Armenia does not have the capacity to stop that, then they're probably going to lose. Now, whether or not this goes into Armenia, whether or not it goes into all of the other territory, it's unknown. And, it's that unknown part that causes a bit of consternation, I would imagine, especially in Moscow. Yeah, this is bad. I don't want Russia and Turkey at odds. And I got to be honest, with our belligerent governments, with the Trump and Russia nonsense, with the Democratic Party being off their tit on the Trump and Russia stuff, my concern is that if Joe Biden wins this race, Democrat goes in winning potentially the House and the Senate with all sorts of conspiracy theories aimed at Russia. The hostility, belligerence, for God fucking sake, I've heard people on Twitter like Russians are rats. This conspiracy theory that doesn't even make sense because of the lawsuits that have taken place that have proven that these things are false. Doesn't matter. They keep in their heads screaming like banshees and howler monkeys that somehow the Russians touched Lady Liberty in an inappropriate way, and undermine democracy itself. It's nonsense. Do I want a bunch of conspiracy theorists getting in office and taking policy in that direction? And what does it mean for that? What does it mean? The point I'm making here is, if this does go to the worst of ends, and you have a situation where Russia gets involved because they are supposed to get involved just by treaty, and Turkey is somehow militarily engaging that country by proxy or directly, with the Biden administration coming in, I'm just saying, Democrats won't make this better. Think about their policies. Think about the things that they say about Russia. Think about the way they attack and aim Russia. If that party gets power and there's a military conflict of any kind of proxy war, would Biden or the Democrats push to join that conflict? And that's the wild card to me that I don't entirely know and I don't entirely understand. Right now, a lot of countries are saying, hey, cut that out. Right now, it doesn't seem like it's going to be cut out. And at the very most of it, let's just hope it doesn't come to the worst. Look, I'm going to end this here. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining me on the show. It's the last day of the week. And all things being equal, I am perfectly content doing shows on my own. It doesn't even occur to me not to. And so, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy. I see Galloway do it, but Galloway does it once a week. And I think to myself this morning, could I pull this off if I did this once, like every day? Maybe. I mean, personally, I've gotten so accustomed to Shane that for the show itself, I'm just accustomed to Shane, and both of us kind of just do the news together. We kind of back and forth and everything else. But when you get the opportunity to do it on your own, it's a good test, or it's a good, I don't know what you call it. It's a good trial, a good test maybe of ability and capability in doing something like that. So I enjoyed it. It's a change, but I want to thank all of you for joining us. Skeptical Jerk, hey, thanks Jamarl, good work, stay healthy, and ask the doctor about basic aspirin for your problem. So yes, but I don't have a doctor like that. When I moved to Maryland, we moved last year? I mean, at the end of this year, the first part of the year. And, you know, the kidney issue was always there. But all things being equal, I was healthier than most, even with the kidney issues. And, you know, like I said, we've been able to travel, bungee jump, whitewater rafting, skydive, all that stuff, even with the material disadvantage regarding health. Everybody has limitations. Doesn't matter what it is. Some limitations, it's just kind of, you manage. You try to find, from the standpoint of your imagination, how do you get around the limitations that are placed on you physically or otherwise. This is not something that you can always do, but to the degree of your illness and to the degree of your own imagination, yes, you may take risks. Yes, you may die in the process. But also, you may live. And fact of the matter is, everybody dies. The objective is not necessarily to risk yourself or to risk your life or to risk your health in dramatic fashion, but it is to understand the limitations or what you can do within the context of those limitations. Because I think people will be surprised what they can pull off, depending on what they're willing to do. Intention, this notion of acceptance, meaning there are things that you have at your disposal to trade for other things that you want. Those things are not always physical and tangible. Sometimes those things are in some degree conceptual. There's cash at one point, but there's also your physical well-being. Meaning there are times where you accept that I'm going to feel miserable for X number of days in order to accomplish the objectives that you want to accomplish, because the objectives matter more than the feeling crummy or miserable. This wasn't that. It wasn't that. This was dramatically different. This is sitting at home, watching TV, smoking a bit of herb, and going blind. That's what this is. The level of freaked outness is hard to get across. And less about, it's weird. It's not the freaked out part. It's the randomness of it. Now, kidney failure was random. I mean, nobody in my family has it. I mean, nobody in my family even has my blood type. And I don't have a second side of the family because my dad's family, I don't even know. Couldn't even tell you who they were if I saw them. So everything was basically on one side and nobody in my family had it. For that matter, I wouldn't accept the transplant because I thought it was, it's like I don't want to take something where it undermines the health of another individual for my own sake. What if that person gets ill? What if that person loses their kidney or something else? And don't tell me that your chances are rare considering them sitting in a fucking hospital without kidneys. It's that. And you get accustomed to life being random and life being out of control. Meaning, if you are ill at the age of 12, you accept that anything can happen to pretty much anybody. Everybody is fair game. There is nobody out there watching. There is nobody out there trying to protect you. And even if you accept or put the premise of God, it doesn't necessarily mean that God is there to give you a decent life or safe life. That precludes potentially the reason for you even being here, if indeed there's a reason for you to be here. God may not be there to protect you. You may go through cancer, epilepsy, you may be in a plane crash, babies get sick, babies get cancer, dogs and puppies also. I'm making a point to you that our reality and our world is not structured around this notion of safety and keeping us safe, even though we do chase safety. And we have this odd quirk of ignoring our own mortality. But the fact of the matter is when your mortality is tested, you can't really ignore it. When you are sitting in a hospital and they're like, your son is going to die, well, it kind of perks the mind up and it keeps the mind attentive in regards to, hey, that sucks. I went through a decade of that, like multiple surgeries every year and all that nonsense. When the eye thing happened, this is after maybe a decade of relatively decent and stable health. And getting a job in the sense of the radio show, meaning a whole nother career, finishing up my degrees, the computer science stuff, all that stuff, was able to get kind of done in a span of time that allowed a marriage, travel, a relative stability of health for the first time in my life. And then out of nowhere, out of the blue, bam, blindness. Thing is, I can tolerate most stuff. If it was them having to take out something, I wouldn't care at all. It's an aggravation. It's an annoyance. The eyesight is not that. It doesn't allow you to ignore it. Like the very looking at something has a black mark that your brain recognizes, even if your other eye compensates. I know that sounds weird. It's just there's a part of my vision that won't grow back or won't come back, and that's unnerving. That's just dramatically unnerving. It's your eyesight, and because it's your eyesight, and to me, this notion of individuality, will, the ability to do X and Y, the ability to use intention and imagination to accomplish things that people think are impossible to accomplish from the standpoint of you and your health and your situation, and you do it anyway. Are there any health problems that preclude you from getting on this airplane and jumping out of a skydive? Nope, not one. Not one. What if you have a heart attack on the way down? Did I have a heart attack on the way down? Everybody dies. Losing your eyesight is different. That's not dying. That's not dying. Yeah, I'm still working through that. It's the loss of vision is terrifying to me. And I've already told my wife, if I lose my vision, I am a non-resuscitate. I don't care if I have a paper cut. Let me bleed to death with the paper cut. It's non-negotiable. If I can't be me, I don't want to be here. And that position, I think, is necessarily right. If everybody dies, why the hell do I want to be here? Not me. For the X amount of time where I have to basically endure that. This is not a thing for everybody. There's some people who can deal with blindness, and they're perfectly okay with dealing with it, the difficulties and everything else. I think that's my breaking point. And so the thing with the eyesight was terrifying to me. There was once when I was younger, and there was like a morphine, and I was allergic to it or whatever, and it was tearing up my eyesight, like where everything was foggy. I couldn't tell if I was losing my eyesight. I was freaking out. To be told that you've had a stroke it's hard to process. Yeah, it's hard to process. It's random. You could drop dead tomorrow. That could have taken all of your eyesight. That could have made you, inability to talk, inability to think, all of those things. If that clot would have went just a little bit further, it could have hit something else, maybe in the retina. It's unnerving. That's all. You need to get back, or I need to get back in some way to the point where I just accept that shit happens. And going for like a decade without major shit happening gets you used to not having to deal with that stuff. So it just is what it is. You live and you keep going. You don't necessarily have a choice to keep going. And again, it's like anything else. You accommodate it and you try to figure out how to get around it. The thing with the eye thing, there's no way to get around it. You're just going to deal. I can see out of full vision, per se. It's difficult to deal with the stripe that's not there. And like I say, you can't ignore that because it's always there. There are times where it gets worse. There are times where it feels like you can't see anything out of it over the course of like the mornings or whatever else. I don't necessarily think that's a thing of the clot getting worse, if the clot is still there. I mean, at the end of the day, the damage to the nerve is done. I've experienced neuropathy before and have for the last 20-something years for a fuck up that I did to myself. When I was younger, and I was first diagnosed, I was 17 when I was first diagnosed. I was very similar in some respects to the way I am now, obstinate, aggressive aggressive at opposition. And, you know, the doctors have this idea that they want to basically, you just follow directions. And I was in a back and forth with my doctors in Virginia. There were 3-4 of them. Dr. Douglas was the greatest man alive to me. And I gave him basically my will to deal with my advance directives. That's how much I cared about him. He caught me when I was first diagnosed. Dr. Douglas had got to the point of seeing me as his kid. Now, as kiddish. Keep in mind, because I was 17, Dr. Young just looked at me as he could be my kid, for God's sake. And Dr. Douglas regarded me as such. And so in dealing with like hospitals, he's like, hey, you can go to the hospital or go to the hospital. Because usually my response was, no, fuck that, I'm not going. There were times where other doctors have called him where he got really pissy at me for getting a call at 11 o'clock at night saying, hey, I need you to get treatment for Jamarl, or he's, having some kind of issue. But through thick and thin, he was there. And, you miss that as you get older and as you move to different places because you're on your own. That's basically how all of this started. He basically said, doctors and all this other stuff. I don't even know my doctor's name. Under normal circumstances, it was never an issue. I would deal with my own health issues. Most of the stuff I've encountered, I fucked up so much that the range of stuff that deals with kidney stuff, I pretty much get. Even the body sensations regarding it, the potassium where your body gets, your heart gets a little weird, your knees start getting weak and everything else, your body such clutches together. Potassium, or let's say not potassium, phosphorus. Phosphorus is a little weirder. Your fingers, your tips of your fingers and everything else get a little bizarre. I guess the point I'm trying to tell you is you get accustomed to your body stuff. Even cannulating yourself. I even stick myself in the standpoint of needles. I used to do it all on my own. I could have a machine there. I could set the machine up. I could do my treatment. I could stick myself. I could take myself off, do all of it. So I was a complete thing. I didn't necessarily entirely need to go to doctors for stuff because unless something came up that was rough. Here in Baltimore, I don't even have that. There are treatment doctors. I couldn't tell you their name. They see you maybe once a month. In Europe, they see you every time you go in. They seem just to be there, just to be there. I don't entirely see the function. As for my primary, he's in Richmond. I have no idea who to talk to over the eye stuff. And that's where we are. That's where I am. If the nerve is dead, then what's the point? And they're like, hey, go to eye therapy. It's like, are they going to get the stuff back? Nope. Okay, what's the point? At some point, does your brain rewire itself to not see that black mark? Maybe. But right now, I don't think there's a way out either for that or stuff regarding treatment. So things have been weird, but I do appreciate the accolades or the good wishes. 1 month. Everything went tits up in 1 month. I go, I'm doing a show. And I'll leave it after this. I'm doing a show. And while I'm doing the show, I get a pain in my arm. It's a fistula. I don't know if you guys know what a fistula looks like, but it's a vein and an artery brought together, fused together, in order to create a large pool of blood that you can stick with a needle to pull the blood out, clean it, stick with another needle to pull the blood back in. The needles are about the size of any pin, like no bullshit, literally. And you take that and you... Now, my arm, you can't see it in Sugar's Always Wear thing. It's 3 sizes, the typical size. The reason is because they put a catheter in that's been in for a month and a half. Because when the fistula stops, you need to have access to blood flow. Otherwise, like I said, you will die over the course of 14 days or whatever. I've gone 30 days without dialysis. My doctor... I did it to prove a point in one sense because I didn't like my doctor. In another sense, I did it because, I thought I could pull it off using herbs and whatnot. I pulled it off twice. I paid for it with vicious neuropathy that has been with me for the last 20-something years. In fact, I had to relearn to walk, for that matter. I couldn't even walk on the floor without any shoes or socks on. That took about 5 or 6 years for that to heal and grow back. The eye, I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things over time. I don't know. But, let's have some more news for the day. I'll leave it here. I mean, we're just kind of shooting the shit at this point. Yeah, man, but I try. You know, you try to stay healthy, you try to live your life. But yeah, this one was weirder. Yeah, I don't know if there's a way out. The fistula basically is created. They use that, or I use that, in order to pull blood out, put blood back in. My fistula has worked for 20-something years. 20 years. Now, these things usually last about 10. And so it's fucking phenomenal that mine lasted for 20-something years. And I had a pain in my arm. And after the show, I realized it stopped. I get an appointment immediately thinking, okay, they just need to declot it. That's what they typically do. And they're like, hey, we can't do that. We can't touch it. They say, we can put a catheter in and you can walk out. Now, that's a false choice. If I walk out, where am I going to do for treatments? And so I put a catheter in. The catheter they put in right here has thrown off the chemistry in my arm in such a way that it's blown my arm up like 3 sizes too big. And their reasoning for this is basically your body has had so many surgeries, so many catheters, so many, hero medicine, that basically how your body gets blood around is weird and different. And at the very point that we put a catheter in, the fact that you have these things kind of shut off in regards to the way your blood supply goes because of the other incidents, it blew your arm up. Meaning there was no way for your blood to circulate in a way that got it out. And so I'm like, okay, how do you stop that? Or how do you get it down? We can't. Can you move the catheter? You have nowhere else to put that catheter upper body. You would have to put it in your leg, and that's a fail. It's like, fuck. All right, what about, so we can't touch it. And so it's basically, yeah, your arm is going to be 3 sizes too big for a while. Yes, you're going to walk around with a catheter for a long period of time. And yes, the issues that you are having are going to persist. And so, it's like, what doctor do you get for that? I have no idea. It's just, it's that simple. We've been considering, we've been trying to find somebody to deal with the issues, but at the end of the day, it either works or it doesn't. I don't think there's a way out. It's just one of those things you have to go through and you have to deal with. That's with anybody. And I suppose it's no different. It is grounding me in a sense. It does have significant body image repercussions. Well, those were already there, but it just made it that much more ghastly and worse. And even if I take a point of view where nothing is really changed, your life is still the same. The randomness is still there. The potential of death or illness and all this stuff is still there. That stuff hasn't gone anywhere. This stuff hasn't changed. The fact of the matter is, there is a change. And the change is pretty prominent in regards to my vision. And that in and of itself is enough to always keep it on your mind because you're always seeing it. And so, this life, you deal. You move on. Today is better than yesterday. Yesterday was better than the day before. But I do thank you for the accolades. You guys, I'm going to end it here. So let's just say like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thank you all. I really do appreciate the audience engagement on the show. So definitely feel free to call in when you guys get the opportunity or want to. And I will see you guys on Monday. So wait, here's a tweet. Bernie Guillotine, I'm not glad Trump has COVID out of spite. I'm glad, wait a minute. I'm not glad Trump has COVID not out of spite. I'm glad because the only way for right-wingers to feel empathy is for them to affect. Yes, Bernie, yes. John McCain hates torture even though he likes bombing the shit out of people, meaning I'm okay with killing them, but I don't like torture. Same thing with Dick Cheney. His wife or his daughter is gay. So Dick Cheney is okay with gays. It goes down the line. When something tangibly affects them, all of a sudden they have empathy because now they can relate. Missing the point that the moment before it tangibly affected them, why wasn't that empathy there? Could that empathy have been there prior? And whatever they're feeling that needs to take place because of some travesty that has taken place in their world, their society, that they have at that point been touched. It's a little rich. It's a little rich. You had the capacity to work with people, but it had to take you to get infected for you to feel for it. No, I feel you, Bernie Guillotine. You're right. Totally right. Not just here, family, the most Jamaicans with high social ties. My grandmother called me pissed after the news broke. Well, you don't want this, token image of a Jamaican as a pot smoker, especially if you have people who are smart, intellectuals, people who go out and do work that is up to the benefiting to them and their community, meaning the trope of the Jamaican pot smoker. Why wouldn't that be offensive to people who might not even be pot smokers, who definitely are Jamaicans, but have to deal with this particular trope? Bob Long. Long live Thomas Sankara. Long live the revolution. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to end this here because I hear somebody hitting the doorbell, and apparently my wife is probably asleep or something. So I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.